I just rediscovered the subreddit, so I thought that I'd post a creepy encounter that one of my friends recently reminded me of. This creepy encounter was kind of prolonged and got especially creepy at the end. I was a fairly awkward and introverted teenage girl, so my high school guidance counselor encouraged me to take the theater elective in 10th grade to help me come out of my shell. The class was terrible and miserable. I hated every single second of it. But it did more than just take me out of my comfort zone. It introduced me to a really weird guy. I wouldn't say that I really thought this guy was a creep from the beginning. He had a fairly obvious crush on me, but he wasn't too weird about it. He wrote me the occasional note and asked me to one school dance. I told him no, and he took the rejection fairly well. He still tried to talk to me all the time, but he eventually started dating someone else and then left me alone. I assumed that the relationship lasted through 11th grade, as I only saw him occasionally and he never tried to talk to me. I went to the 12th grade homecoming dance with a group of my friends, and we actually spent a good portion of the night dancing and really enjoying ourselves. At one point, we sat down to rest and have a snack. The guy from the 10th grade theater class came over to me and sat at our table. He seemed upset and actually started crying. So I asked him if he was okay. He told me that his girlfriend had just dumped him, and I responded that that's pretty shitty of her to do at a high school dance. I guess he took this as me making a move on him, because he immediately grabbed my arm, yanked me up from the table, and pulled me to a fairly secluded corner. He was immediately in my personal space, asking me if I would be his new date. I tried to push him away, but he had a pretty firm grip on me, and then tried to go in for the kiss. I was in total shock that this happened and kind of froze. Luckily, one of my friends swooped in and told him that I was her date, so he should back off. He spent the rest of the evening dancing fairly close to us, but he luckily didn't say anything. Flash forward to the rest of 12th grade. I didn't have a class with him, but his locker was fairly close to mine, so I unfortunately saw him a lot. He stared at me a lot, but he didn't say much to me until right before graduation. He asked to sign my yearbook. I was afraid that he would say something weird in it, so I told him no. I did wish him good luck in life. He responded that I was what he would miss the most about high school. I kind of forgot that he existed until about 3.5 years later. I was in college and got a message from someone asking me if I knew him and when we had last spoken. Apparently, she was his girlfriend. I had told her that we had gone to high school together and hadn't spoken to him since we graduated. She asked me why he talked about me all the time. I told her honestly I had no idea because we weren't even friends on social media. Then she asked me why she found my first and last name in his wallet. I was incredibly confused by this and asked her what she meant. She told me that she was going through his wallet and she found my first and last name on a piece of paper. She said he'd said that I must have stuck it in his wallet as a joke when we were hanging out, which obviously never happened. I think she was expecting me to confess that he was cheating with me or something, but all it did was freak me the fuck out. I found him on social media and blocked him, then blocked her too for good measure. Luckily, I haven't heard from him since, and this was about 11 years ago, but I have to wonder why he had my name in his wallet. As a side note, he was on the local news just a week or so later because his dad met someone online and then locked her in the basement for a weekend. He was defending his dad and calling the woman a liar. I'm pretty sure that his dad wound up in prison for kidnapping and criminal confinement, so the apple didn't fall too far from the creep tree. So another post reminded me of this man. I'm a female. When I was in high school, I was always in advanced math, which meant Calculus 1, Calculus 2, and other math classes, but I don't remember the subject. So for all 3 years of high school, I had this man as a teacher. If a female had a question, he would sit as close as possible, as in thigh touching thigh, with his hand on their neck. If a male had a question, he bent over the top of their desk, not touching it at all. This creeped me out. At the time, 1990s, there had been a satanic panic in the United States where a bunch of kid educators were fired for rumors. At this time, everything was bouncing back so that the educator was now automatically believed over any child. As I said, I was 15 or 16 when I first met him, and 18 when I had my last class with him. I don't know what prompted me to tell my mom about this man's inappropriateness. I just knew I had to tell someone because he was super creepy. I will never forget my mom's reaction. "Don't you ever say that about him. He's a good man who lives with his elderly mother and volunteers to teach migrant farmers' children." I learned that my mother would believe an adult pedophile over her daughter. I never shared any of my feelings about strange kids or adults ever again. To be honest, this grown-ass man had too much control over a bunch of kids who may not have spoken English very well. And the fact that he never dated or moved away from his mom creeped me the hell out. I never heard of him actually touching a kid, but I also wouldn't be surprised. When I was in 7th grade, I had an older English teacher whom my parents worked with a long time ago. So at first, I thought that was pretty cool, and I was super friendly with him. For my first year, he'd always bring me candy, give me extra work when I asked for it. I like to study, so I'm not nervous about exams. He would let me and my friends have lunch with him in the classroom. After a while of this, my friends started teasing me, saying that I had a crush on him. They would do that joke a lot in class. I don't know if he heard, because he started being even more friendly. I told my friends to stop, but they were very toxic, so they didn't listen. One winter night, it was really dark outside, and my dad had a very important meeting, so he had to pick me up about 5 p.m. I didn't take that bus that day, because I went to after-school activities and music. So I was just sitting there on the bench by the door, playing some game on my phone. He came out of the nearby hallway and said, "Hey, why are you at school so late?" Because of my friends teasing me, I didn't want to talk to him, so I just said that I was waiting for my dad. Then he proceeded to offer me a ride home, since it was obviously getting late. I said no, and he kept insisting. I got annoyed and he eventually left. I did tell my dad, and he was just glad I didn't accept. After that, he stopped being nice to me and just became very cold. I didn't care though, and the next year I didn't see him again. I don't know if that was creepy or not, but it generally made me feel like he was grooming me. Plus, I was only 12. I'm 16 now, and I don't know if I was being weird because of my friends, or if he was actually creepy. I recently saw a post on TikTok that made me think back to this creepy male sub I had in middle school. I was 12 or 13 at the time and attending class with one other kid. It was a computer class and we sat on opposite sides of the rows of computers. This young male substitute teacher was helping the other kid, and when he was done, he asked me if I needed help with anything. I politely said no because I knew what I was doing at the moment. He didn't like the answer and insisted that he should come help me. I kept declining and let him know that the other kid needs his help. He ignored me and sat down next to me. He sat so close that his thigh touched mine. I kept inching away from him, but he kept moving closer. This went on for 45 minutes until the bell rang. At the end of class, it was my teacher's policy that we get candy if we passed all the tests that day. I hadn't passed any due to the lack of focus on my work because of the creeper touching my thigh. Anyway, he let the kid, male student, have candy for his past test, then offered me some. I informed him that I hadn't passed any tests, so I didn't get any. He said he wouldn't tell if I did, and kept insisting that I wanted candy. The other student had already left, so to avoid being alone with him, I took my shot and ran out of the room when some kids were passing. I later told a teacher I trusted, whose classroom was down the hallway. He had already had his eye on the sub and walked me to and from class in that hall for the whole week the sub was there. Thankfully, never had that sub in my class again. Writing about my old poetry teacher reminded me of all the weird interactions I've had with teachers growing up. This one is probably the creepiest, which is why I probably blocked it out of my memory for so long. The memories are a little fuzzy, honestly. When I was in 2nd or 3rd grade, my music teacher went on maternity leave, so we had a sub for a semester. He was a large man, but kinda had a gentle giant vibe, or that's what my kid brain called it. I loved his classes. He talked about how music can make us feel and affect emotions. I always raised my hand when he asked questions or wanted to volunteer. I remember there was a turning point, but I don't remember what it was. I remember that he started singling me out. He would talk to me before class as everyone was sitting down. He would pick me every time I raised my hand to pass out papers. He always picked me first when questions were asked. As a kid, I loved the attention. My older sisters are triplets, so his attention made me feel special, even though I wasn't a multiple. We would always walk together during fire alarms, or when we walked down the hall. I was always the last person, so he could walk beside me and talk. I started talking about him to my mom. I remember she was weirded out by it, but he never touched me, and he wasn't going to be there forever, so she just kept an eye on the situation. Eventually, I started getting weirded out by it. I was picked to pass out papers, and all my classmates groaned. One even said, "You only ever pick her. No one else gets to pass out papers." And that's when I started getting uncomfortable. I really was the only person he picked or talked to directly. I stopped raising my hand, and he would still pick me. I stopped answering questions, but he would still ask me first. I wouldn't openly talk when he walked beside me between classes either. For a while, I thought he was paying attention to me because my dad had a well-known music store in the area, and it had been a staple of the city for more than 100 years. But he never asked me about my dad or his business. Eventually, my mother had enough and talked to the main teacher. She told her that he needed to back off and that his attention made me and her uncomfortable. But he didn't stop. If anything, I remember him making more of an effort to talk to me. He would ask me if I could hear music in the fire alarms, and he said that maybe I was uncomfortable because I wasn't used to being special. He hugged me after the last one, and I just stood stock still until he let me go. Eventually, it was Christmas, and he was going to be gone after the Christmas play. I'd done everything to distance myself from him, but nothing worked. I was relieved that I wouldn't see him after Christmas break. At the end of the play, he came and introduced himself to my parents. He told them how special I was, and that I was amazing and a helpful student. He offered to tutor me privately. Obviously, my mother said no, but my dad didn't think anything of it, and just thought he was a nice guy. Seeing as my dad is also creepy, it makes sense now that he saw nothing wrong with the man's behavior. For a good 5 years after that, he would write me letters and send me Christmas cards. He would ask to see me, or for me to write back. I still don't know how he had my address. My mom used to open them and read them, but something about them eventually made her start throwing them away as soon as we got them. Then after a year of no responses, he stopped writing. Now that I'm older, I realize that I'm probably too old for him to be interested anymore. I don't remember his name, but I remember his face and creepy hug. I was an 18-year-old female at the time, and a first-year college student, working full-time and taking 18 units of college classes. My parents paid all my school expenses, and they did not want me to work. They hoped that I would just concentrate on my studies, but I worked anyway. So I'd go to school all day, go directly to Taco Bell afterwards, then go over to my boyfriend's house for a couple hours, then home. I was young and energetic and able to keep up with my schedule. So one night around 10 p.m., the rest of the restaurant employees were already gone, and I closed and worked alone for the last couple hours. A tall, large black man came to the window and asked what the cheapest menu item was. He ordered it. I took his money, closed the little window, made change, and then handed him his food, then closed the little window. It was at that time that I noticed on one of his hands, his left, all his fingernails were at least an inch past his fingertips and filed into sharp pointy claws. I thought to myself, that was odd, but whatever. He then asked if I could make change for a $5 bill so that he could have exact change for the bus. I opened the window, took the $5 bill, and then turned to the cash register on my left, about 18 inches away, making change. I hear something and look back, and this guy's head is coming through the window, followed by his arms and shoulders, and he's grabbing and clawing at me. I think he was trying to reach around me to get the cash in the register, but when he grabbed me, I thought he was coming in to assault me. Now in hindsight, I could have done a bunch of effective things to drive him back. Instead, I was screaming and started pummeling his face with my fists. I had brothers. I fought him off, grabbed the paper bills out of his hand, and drove him back through the window and shut it. I missed hitting him a couple times and hit the edge of the counter with my palms. I got big bruises from that. He ran off. I called the police and then called the owner of the restaurant. The police came and I made a report. The owner didn't want any press and was upset that I called the police. So a couple days later, I'm in a chemistry lecture, which is in a small amphitheater of maybe 150 students. The lecture is about to start, and this guy sitting next to me on the right drops his calculator on the floor right in front of me. I kindly say, "Oh, I'll get it for you." I pick it off the floor and hand it back to him, right into his open left hand with long clawed fingernails. Cue my racing heartbeat. I pretended not to know that he was the guy that robbed me and assaulted me. Coincidence? Not likely. As soon as class ended, I raced past 5 or 6 people to my left, practically flew right over them, and once I get to the main aisle, I look back at him. He raised his arms with a clawing motion towards me and growled at me as he was in pursuit of me. I took off out of there. The next time I went to that class, he tried to sit close to me again to intimidate me, and it was working. I decided to call the police from home that afternoon and explain the situation. The guy seemed to be following me around the campus, and it scared me. I don't know if he followed me from school to my workplace to attack me there. They were many miles apart. The police had an undercover watch me at school before chemistry, so I could point out my stalker. I had to tell my professor the situation of why I had people watching over me. The plan was to sit in the grass outside my chemistry class, and when I saw the guy, I would give a nod and walk into my class. He didn't show up the first stakeout day, but did the second day. They arrested him. Now, the restaurant owner dropped the robbery charges as he didn't lose anything and didn't want the press. Nobody asked me, and I was the one attacked. The police told me that they warned him never to look at me or talk to me ever again if we ran into each other. They will arrest him if he keeps it up. I never saw him again. He dropped the class. My professor gave me a B even though I never got better than a D on the test. He had a lengthy rationalization of why I deserved it, but I know he felt sorry for me. Fortunately, that helped because I was awful at chemistry, stalker or not. I gave my 2 weeks notice at the restaurant, and every remaining night I worked, my parents would sit at an outdoor table and play cards until I left for home safely. So my family is Italian, and I've spent a lot of my life in Italy. I feel comfortable there, though I've always known it could be a little unsafe for a woman traveling alone. However, I don't really look or seem like a tourist, so I usually feel pretty confident that I won't be targeted. This naive thinking led me to a scary situation. I was living and working in a smaller city while on a gap year and had made some college-age friends who were also from out of the country. We had been spending most of our evenings going to bars, eating good food, all the fun things you can do as a young person in Italy. One night, one of my friends and I were hitting a bar when a group of men asked to buy us drinks. There were about 4 or 5 of them, all seemed to be Italian and a little older than us. Being new to the city, we felt flattered and excited by the attention from some attractive local men. They bought us drinks and we walked with them to the nearest piazza. Most of the guys seemed normal, maybe a little pervy, but nothing to raise alarms. There was one guy though that didn't talk at all. One of the other guys told me that the quiet guy wanted to kiss me and I should go home with him. I laughed it off and refused. Italian men are known for being misogynist and forward, so it wasn't surprising. They kept flirting with us and asked us to go back and smoke something with them, but we declined. 1 a.m. rolls around and my friend and I decide it's time to go back to our apartments. We say goodbye and start heading home. Unfortunately, we lived in a different part of the city, so after a minute or two, we split ways. My friend lived close by, but I lived 30 minutes away, outside of the city walls. We're both kind of drunk, and we're small women, so we tell each other to stay safe. I begin my long walk home. After about 15 minutes, I start to feel weird. I get a strange sensation, and I decide to call my long-distance boyfriend just to have someone on the phone. I'm chatting with him, listening to him talk about his day, when I suddenly get a bad feeling. I turn around and standing behind me, about 30 feet away, is the quiet guy from the bar. He's followed me for almost 20 minutes, walking just behind me after I left. I'm on a long cobblestone road in the middle of the night and there's no one else, just me and him and my boyfriend on the phone. I instantly go into panic mode as this guy starts walking up to me. I tell my boyfriend on the phone that I'm being followed and to stay on the line. The guy gets closer to me and I'm almost frozen in fear. I don't want to run because the long road leads further out of the city into a dark strip of abandoned parkland and a stretch of interstate. This man reaches me and has an awful ugly smile on his face. He's taller than I am, probably late 20s, and is clearly on some sort of drugs. He tells me that I need to come with him and grabs me by my arm. My boyfriend is still on the phone, and I narrate everything that's happening. This guy clearly doesn't speak English. He also doesn't speak Italian very well, but is insisting in a thick, strange accent that I come with him. He has me tightly by my arm and pulls me in to give me a disgusting, sweaty kiss. He smells like vomit. I have no idea how I formulated this plan, but I'm proud of what I did next. I told this man that I'm engaged and that I'm a good American girl, whatever that means, and that I won't go with him, but I'll meet him tomorrow at 12 o'clock and he can take me on a date. He asked me for my Instagram and I gave it to him. Panicked, I watch him type my name into his phone. Then he lets go of the grip and turns around. He's happy with the plan we've made. I watch him for a few seconds to make sure he's not going to change his mind and turn back to me. Then I start to run down the road, seriously faster than I've ever ran before. I get back to my apartment and lock myself in. I open my Instagram and immediately block this guy's account. My poor boyfriend was so freaked out because there's nothing he could do. So I didn't see this guy again. I was extremely shaken up and ended up moving apartments so I could be within the city walls. When I told my landlord the story to explain why I was moving, she told me about something even more chilling. A year ago, on that exact long road leading out of the city, an American girl was jumped by 2 men, dragged behind the retaining wall of the interstate, and brutally assaulted. The men were apparently part of a prolific Albanian gang that had a stronghold in the city and were engaged in human trafficking. Remembering the man's strange accent, I am convinced that he was part of that same gang. I don't want to think what could have happened if I had not gotten lucky. I think this man might have just decided I wasn't worth it. That beautiful Italian city I was living in lost its glamour once I experienced that terrifying underbelly. This situation happened about a year ago. It's important to note that I'm also a girl, so this was a very scary and potentially dangerous situation for both of us. One night after work, just after it became dark, my girlfriend stopped at the Walmart neighborhood market down the road, which by the way is next to a big highway interstate. I made a last minute run to the bank. Right as I'm pulling out of the bank, I get a text from her about thinking she's being followed. I asked her for more details and also told her not to leave the store and that I was going to drive up to the front door and either watch her get to her car or get her into mine if she needed. She told me that there were two men that she kept seeing in every single aisle, usually behind her. They were very clearly staring at her each time and watched her very closely. She thought she was just being paranoid, but I told her to trust her gut and let a worker know about the situation, and even call the police because it isn't worth the risk. Before I made it all the way there, she texted me saying she's at checkout. She said that the guys followed her there and went to self-checkout near her, but with no items. They quickly grabbed some gum off the shelf and put it into a Walmart sack, but they stood there taking forever to cash out that item and kept watching her, waiting for her to finish. I told her to check out as slowly as humanly possible. I finally arrived. She had just texted me that she finally took her bag and was exiting the store. However, right as I pulled up, I saw the two guys. They perfectly matched her description of them. They were hiding in a little cutout near the entrance. They were just standing there and kept peeking around the corner at the front door every time someone exited. I knew they were looking for her. I pulled my car forward right in front of them. I literally rolled my window down and just stared into their souls. I did not look away. I wanted to make sure that even though they didn't know I had anything to do with her, that I got a very good look at their faces and was watching them. I texted her and told her not to return to her car. I told her to get straight into mine. Right then, they started walking off. However, they had to have been following her since she arrived at the store because the next thing they did was walk straight to her car. Her car is very unique and stands out. They dropped the bag of gum on the ground on the way to her car. One of them went behind her car and just stayed there. The next one walked over to a white work van with painted windows and no license plate. He spoke to someone that was in the driver's seat. While this was happening, one of the cars next to hers left. They then pulled the van up to the spot. I called her and told her to go straight to my car and don't even look at hers, as they were waiting for her with the van. She came out with groceries and they see her and squat down. We really quickly load up and she gets in my car. The men stood up and walked to the van. I pull away and try to go around the van to see the license plate. Of course, there was none. I drove off in a totally different direction from home and we drove around for a while. I wanted to make sure no one was following us and also give them time to leave her car alone. I wanted to call the cops, but she was convinced we were just seeing things that weren't there, like taking a coincidence and making it into something. Obviously, looking back, after having talked in depth about both of our experiences, we definitely should have called the cops, and I regret this. I've since seen the van with the same two guys driving back in the neighborhoods behind the Walmart. I was turning onto a street and they were turning off, still no license plate, but their van had more things on the exterior to make it look like a work van. Things like a ladder on the roof. I got creeped out and quickly tried to get away just in case they turned around and tried to come for me. So I floored at home. Again, I thought about calling the police, but what am I gonna say? Yeah, there's two men driving away from a neighborhood with a work van. Gotta get them. They don't even take most things seriously, even when it results in something actually happening. I just truly hope there's a valid explanation for all these actions, and that I just want to come to a conclusion that that was not the case, but I don't know. Maybe they waited at the front because they didn't see their buddy with a van and thought he was maybe inside the Walmart and were just looking out for him. Her car was very cool, so maybe they just liked it and were looking at it. Maybe they just wanted to steal parts off her car. Maybe there's an explanation, but probably not. It doesn't explain them following her or getting gum in a bag just to drop it in the parking lot. Luckily, I haven't heard about any kidnappings coming out of that Walmart, but who knows, it's not like I've been digging for it. But I do know that I'm extra cautious now and try not to go out past dark. I also scan the parking lot for the van before I go in, but normally I just do curbside pickup now. My girlfriend does the same thing. I'd posted on here a couple times with a few of my creepy encounters. I was having a chat with my mother and my sister about these, and they each had their own stories to tell. For now, I will be telling my sister's creepy story. For safety reasons, I will not be revealing names. To give a few details about my sister, she's not the type you would mess around with. She usually had creepy people walk up to her to flirt or catcall her. She would usually tell them to shove off. She can usually handle herself in these kinds of experiences. But she told me what happened at Walmart years ago that really scared her. It happened when she was 23 years old, living out of state with her boyfriend, now husband. It was her day off from work, and she was running errands alone while her boyfriend was at work. One of her trips was to go to Walmart and pick up some snacks and a gift for her birthday party. She headed for the toy aisle to pick out something for her gift. That's when she noticed a man in the aisle. He was staring at the toys. My sister noticed right away that he didn't have a cart or anything in his hands to look like he was shopping. My sister picked up an item and moved towards the food aisle to get some snacks and extra stuff. She glanced up after picking up something, seeing the man from before, looking at stuff again, yet he wasn't carrying anything. This made my sister very suspicious. She tried an experiment to see if this man was actually following her. She went to the DVD aisle. He was there. She tried the home decor aisle. He was there. Even the woman's underwear section. He was there. This really scared her. Anywhere she tried to avoid him, he would turn up in the same area. My sister had had it with this man, wanting to get away from him. She made her way to the checkout while she picked up her phone to call her boyfriend. She told him that she had been followed by this man and was afraid to go outside to her car just in case the man would follow her there. Her boyfriend told her to tell one of the employees and stay with them. She did what he told her, telling the cashier about what happened. The employees were super nice and had someone look around the store for this man. My sister then said that while she was waiting in checkout, she saw the man again. He saw her and ran out of the store quickly. One of the employees then walked my sister to her car safely, and thankfully, she never saw anyone outside or anywhere else after that. Knowing my sister, I'm awfully glad that she decided not to confront the man. Otherwise, it could be a totally different story. This happened 2 years ago, but I was horrified and still have a very clear memory of this encounter. My child was almost 2, and we were invited to a retirement party from the school board for my mother-in-law. The party was at my brother-in-law and his wife's house. The party consisted of people snacking and drinking and milling around, visiting and talking all over the home. I glanced across the room and see my husband holding my son with one arm and looking in another direction, talking to one of his brothers. I see a strange man behind my husband, someone I don't know. He's intently rubbing up and down my son's back, almost in a sexual way. I felt so alarmed by this sight. My husband was completely oblivious to what was happening. I rushed over and grabbed my son and held him while walking in a completely different part of the house. The man followed me. He said, "Hey, put your son down." I said no. He kept repeating, "Put him down, put him down." He knows who his parents are. It's okay to let him wander around and explore the house. He knows how to find you again. I said no. He started becoming louder, like he had been drinking and lost his inhibitions. He kept insisting I put my son down, and I said, "I will never put him down. Why are you so interested? Mind you, the kid was awkward and heavy to hold for so long. So I walked across the house with my child and told my husband and one of his brothers that the man was aggressively rubbing my son's back, and I think he's a pedophile and wants to molest him. He keeps pestering me and trying to get me to let him wander around out of my sight. I gave him back to my husband with instructions to not ever put him down and to look out for this creepy guy who wants him so badly. I then go into the kitchen where my brother-in-law's wife was, told her about the situation, and said if this guy doesn't leave my kid alone, I will be making a huge scene. But didn't want to ruin the party. She said, go for it, no problem if I did. I asked around about who the creepy guy was, and he was the school principal. Great, wonder how handsy he has been with the school children. He stayed away after that, but I was prepared to go to war for my baby. When I was 10, I was camping at a campground that my family and I went to for years. One day I was riding my bike around the campground. I did this a lot when we stayed the weekend. I rode around the basketball courts and where the game room was. This was a little ways from where my family and I were staying. I had been out for a while and figured it was time to go back. I saw a guy drive up to me in a silver pickup truck and gave a smile. Maybe that's what made him stop, but I was only trying to be polite. He drove up to me and asked what I'm up to and why I'm alone. I told him I was riding my bike and that I was about to head back to my campsite. He tells me to get in the back of his truck and that he'll take me back to the campsite. I felt a little uneasy about it, but me being a kid, I did what he asked because he was an adult. I put my bike on the back of his truck and sat back there with it. He drove around for a while, and I got a little uneasy because he was going further and further away from where I was staying. I finally told him my great uncle's name and where we were staying in the camp, and he drove in that direction. I didn't even wait for him to stop. I just hopped out when he slowed down. He looked at my great aunt and said she was lost and asked for help, so I brought her back. My aunt looked a little confused but thanked him. I looked at her and said, he told me to get in his truck, and I listened. She then talked to me and said not to ever go into someone's truck you didn't know. I get that it was kind of my fault and I could have avoided it, but again, this was the early 2000s and I was raised to always do what adults ask or told you to do. I'm not sure what this man's intentions were or why we drove around for so long, but I'm thankful nothing happened. From when I was born, I lived with my mom and my maternal grandparents. I never met my dad. My granddad passed away when I was around 7, and my mom was severely mentally ill and an alcoholic. My childhood sucked, and then when I was 11, my mom committed suicide, and I got put into care as my grandmother was too old and frail to take care of me full time. It was a shitty time. Only thing I was looking forward to was getting on the train and visiting my grandma on a Saturday. Now I was 11, and there was no way that I would allow my 11-year-old to get on a train and take an hour journey each way alone. But times were different back then. So back to the story. One Saturday, I had seen my grandmother and was waiting at the same station as I do every week to go home. A man seemed to appear out of nowhere, like he was hiding around the corner, and sat next to me. He kept looking at me, and I was beginning to get a little freaked out. I felt slightly better as I saw there was another person on the opposite side of the tracks waiting for the train. The man suddenly came closer to my face and asked me for my name. I ignored him. I was pretty street smart for my age and knew not to speak to strangers. He then said to me, "I asked what your name was," this time raising his voice more. He put his hand on my leg, and I looked over to the man on the opposite side, trying to get his attention, but he looked over and noticed what was going on, and looked away. So by now, I knew I was on my own. The man was touching me on my leg, so I stood up and backed off. He said to me that he has some puppies at his house, and he's gonna take me to go see them. I said no thank you, as he started walking towards me. He tried to grab me, and I sprinted so fast out of that train station, and I didn't stop running until I got back to my grandmother's house. Now I'm an adult and think back to that day and remember the man sitting opposite and looking away, turning a blind eye, and wonder, was he part of it too, or was he just an asshole? I always wonder what would have happened to me if I hadn't managed to run away, or if I did follow the man to his house. This happened several years ago, back when I was still in elementary school. So excuse me if I get a few things wrong. I'm almost 40 years old now. My mom had given me the usual curfew of when the streetlights came on, be home. I was at my friend's house, who lived on the same street as me, but about a block up the road. I had to cross one street to get to their house. Their house was on the same side of the street as mine, except having to cross an intersection. It was getting dark. I knew I had roughly about 5 minutes to make it home. Not a big deal. I've done these walks several times a day, every single day that I was home. On this day, my friend decided to walk me halfway home, which was to this intersection. Sitting there stopped at the stop sign was an aqua green van. That's the color I remember. It was an odd mix between blue and green. Obviously, it's normal for a vehicle to stop at a stop sign. It's even normal for a vehicle to stay stopped for a few moments if they're trying to find their way around the area. What's not normal is for a strange vehicle to wait at the stop sign with no oncoming traffic. What's not normal is for two men to wait for two little girls that they do not know to get close to the van. A van with no back or side windows. Creepy van to start with. What's not normal is for the passenger to stare us down. What's not normal was to see a gun on the driver's lap. Upon spotting the gun, I whispered to my friend that they had a gun and that we needed to turn around and run. I told her that I was going to go on a count of 3, that way she had a chance to stay with me. This was winter in Michigan. There was snow and ice, very slippery. Needless to say, when we started running back to her house, she slipped and banged her knee really bad. This was close enough to her house that her cousin could hear me yelling for her to get up and run, which she couldn't do. I had to pick her up and run with her in my arms. Her cousin was playing in the ice with the ice pick when he came towards us to see what the commotion was about. One of the guys saw my cousin coming towards us. They gunned it out of there as fast as they could, so no one could get the license plate. I had to wait at my friend's house until the cops came to escort me home. One would hope that would be the end of it. Nope. I saw the same damn van following the school bus a few days later. Came home and told my mom. She started following our school bus with a shotgun. She had got it because of the attempted kidnapping. Then I started seeing the guys outside the fence that surrounded my playground at school, in a wooded area. For some reason that I'll really never know, they really wanted me. They tried to coax me out of the playground into the woods with them. This lasted for about 2 weeks before they finally just left. Years ago, right after I graduated from high school, I did a lot of couch surfing and was staying with my friend Mike for a while. His family lived about 30 miles north of the town I worked in, and his mother usually brought me down to town with her when she went to work in the morning. Mike and I would often stay late in town and hang out with friends, so we would have to bum rides or hitchhike back if we wanted to sleep in the house. So one Friday, he and I stuck around town too long and missed our ride back. We were young, brave, little tough guys, so we didn't think much about hitchhiking back. We hung around the interstate exit with our thumbs out and scored a ride with these really cool and super high Jamaican Rastafarian dudes in an old Volvo. They ran us most of the way up the highway and dropped us off in a town 5 miles from where we were headed. Everything was going well. We were happy we made such great time getting that far. We walked through the town, stopped for drinks, and headed out to the north end to start hitching again. We got picked up pretty quickly by a guy in his 40s, friendly, with Kenny G-like hair. He tells us that he's headed right past the road that we were heading for, We couldn't believe our luck. I jumped in the front, Mike gets in the back. It's a big old boat of a car. As we come up the turn, dude puts his hand on my leg. I'm like, what the fuck do you think you're doing? I push his hand off and tell him we're getting out of there. It's starting to get dark, but I'll walk in the fucking dark. Guy says, it's cool. I'll drive you where you're headed. You don't need to get out of here. And puts his hand back on my leg and keeps driving. I'm like, pull the fuck over now, and reach for my pocket knife. Mike, in the back seat, grabs the guy in the headlock, choking the shit out of him. The guy lets go of my leg and starts yanking on Mike's arm, trying to get free. Both hands are off the wheel and the car is swerving all over the road. We're still going at least 40 and I'm terrified we're gonna crash. This big tree comes up in front of us, but the driver must have seen it because he slammed on the brakes at the last second. Mike is still trying to pop this guy's head off. I look at the dashboard and realize he's going slow enough for us to bail out. I yell, "Jump!" shove the door open, and dive out onto the pavement. The driver realizes I'm getting away and hits the gas. The door springs back and almost catches my feet. The back wheel misses me by an inch, and the car is going 50 again. Mike is rolling in the middle of the road, and I realized we both had gotten out of the car. I grabbed him and dragged him off the road into the trees. The car is doing a U-turn in the middle of the road, about 100 yards away, and is coming back towards us. We eat mud and dirt while we hide as low as we can make ourselves. Both of us are skinned, banged up, and bleeding from the pavement. This psycho drives past real slow, trying to spot us, turns around and comes back again. Every time he gets out of sight, we jump and run through the woods, headed towards Mike's parents' house, still several miles away. Every time we hear the car coming, we drop and hide. The car must have gone up and down those roads dozens of times or more, looking for us. It took us nearly 2 more hours to make it a couple more miles in the woods in the dark. We finally get to the house, dirty, bloody, and exhausted. Mike's parents go nuts when they see us. Mike's dad is a scary guy. He's huge, about 6'6", and construction worker strong. He's got a beard down to his chest, and his hobby is pounding Budweiser with his friends until they're drunk enough to knock each other out. So naturally, instead of calling the police, he marches down the driveway and makes us stand by the road as bait for this driver to come back, while he hides in the woods. We stood there for another 2 hours, but the guy didn't come back, which I have mixed feelings about. Mike's dad probably would have beaten the guy to death if he caught him, which is that guy's problem, but I'm afraid that guy had a gun or something. After all, he was planning on kidnapping 2 guys at the same time. Mike's mom made us report it to the police. I never heard if they caught the guy, and that's why I don't hitchhike or pick up hitchhikers anymore. When I was about 13 and my sister was about 12, we were playing outside and jumping on the trampoline. Suddenly, we noticed a strange man standing on our property, watching us. He was on the other side of the yard, near the neighbor's fence. My sister and I ran into the house, and my mom called her neighbor to talk to him. Turns out this guy had a fake gun in his pocket. He claimed to be doing work for another neighbor, but then he left. My mom called the police, and they wanted to talk to him. He lived behind us on the other side of the road. Turns out, he was a registered sex offender and wasn't allowed to own guns. He never came back at least, and my parents put us into self-defense classes. My dad took me to see his favorite team play for my birthday one year. I remember the line was pretty big, and we had just arrived at the stadium. Some guy approached my dad and told him that he could get me, 8 years old, in a side door for free, and it would just be my dad that needed to wait in line for a ticket for himself. I remember willing my dad to say no inside my head. I could see how off it was. Yet my dad stood to consider it for a while. Eventually he said no, and that he would just get in the normal way. I literally could have been taken away by this man to God knows where. A few things that stood out in my 8-year-old brain was how convincing the guy was trying to be. He kept repeating himself and saying words like free and meet back together once inside. I was super relieved when my dad said no, but I was raging at him for even considering it to be an option. The whole vibe was seedy. I had an off feeling for the rest of that day. My intuition told me that this guy was bad news, and I also learned that my dad is an idiot. So when I was around 2 or 3 years old, my mom and dad, now divorced, were friends with this couple that worked with my dad at his office. They would always ask to babysit me and love to see me a lot, and my parents thought nothing of it. One day, they asked to take me to Disney World along with their niece, and my mom had no issue with it. My dad, on the other hand, thought it was weird because they offered to pay for me and everything. He told them no and made up an excuse for me not to go. The couple weren't seen for weeks after that, and the company that my dad and them worked for were having an investigation because that same couple who wanted to take me to Disney committed massive fraud and stole hundreds of thousands of dollars. They disappeared and my dad has no idea what happened to them since he no longer works there, but he believes fully that they wanted to take me and disappear. He thinks that they couldn't have kids of their own and really wanted one. It still creeps me out that I could have a completely different life and family. Thank God my dad was home because my mom wanted to let me go. By the way, just for some context, as a baby, I had bright blue eyes and long curly blonde hair. I looked like I could be on Toddlers with Tiaras, straight up. Not to toot my own horn, but I was an extremely gorgeous baby. Maybe that's why they had their eye on me. But who knows? They could have wanted to sell me too, or worse. Long-time lurker here, and first-time posting. I'm a 24-year-old female. When I was around 7 or 8 years old, I had a best friend that lived right around the block from me. We grew up in a quiet suburban town where you didn't really hear about crime all that much. My friend, let's call her Brandy, lived at a house on the corner with a pretty large front yard. It had a little garden area with rocks closer to the sidewalk at the end of her yard. We would often sit on the rocks and talk about whatever kids that age talked about. I remember it being dusk on a warm summer night. We were distracted by our conversation, and neither of us initially noticed the same car drive by multiple times. Mind you, her road was a quiet side street, so it would be a bit odd for the same car to be driving around in circles. The reason we noticed it the final time was because they actually pulled over in the street right in front of us. Initially, I remember thinking that they needed directions. Dumb in hindsight, because who would ask kids for directions? It wasn't until we saw both of the car doors swing open that the gravity of the situation began to sink in. Keep in mind, the street was only about 8 to 10 feet from where we were sitting on our yard. Both individuals seemed to be men with their hoods up, and the passenger immediately lunged at us, saying nothing. My friend screamed and ran towards her front door. I, in total shock, was a bit slower to react. I noticed he also held something reflective in his right hand, most likely a knife looking back. He actually almost grabbed me, but I made a run for it just in time and caught up to my friend at the front door. Now here's the creepiest part. For whatever reason, Brandy's family locked the door. She had an older sister that accidentally locked it without realizing that we were playing outside. I vividly remember banging on the door and screaming, with tears streaming down my face, hoping and praying that they would open it up. The men didn't chase us to the door, but they didn't leave yet either. I remember looking over my shoulder and seeing them smirking and standing near their car. It felt like they were waiting to see if we were home alone. A moment later, but it felt like an eternity, my friend's mom swung open the door, and both men jumped into the car and peeled out. There were actually tire marks on the road from how ferociously they whipped around and sped off. Brandy's mom, who also saw the car peel out, was extremely upset and immediately called the police. I remember my mom also being called, and Brandy and I were both questioned at our house by police officers that arrived soon after that. Brandy and I mentioned we had each briefly noticed a car drive by multiple times, but we didn't put two and two together until after things took a turn for the worst. I've never heard anything else about this after that day, but this experience remains burned into my memory. I still get anxious thinking about what could have happened if that front door didn't open when it did. My parents divorced when I was around 8, and my mom moved to another province while I stayed with my dad. I would fly for visits as an unaccompanied minor up until the age of 12. The unaccompanied minor program essentially buddies you up with a flight attendant, and you will stay with them for the entire trip. When I turned 12, I was on my first solo flight that had a layover. I was always told as a kid about people you can trust and uniforms, etc. An indication of a trustworthy adult. When a man, in what I assumed to be pilot overalls, approached me and struck up a conversation, I thought nothing of it. I let him know that I had a layover and was waiting for my next flight. He told me that he was a helicopter pilot and was between flights as well. He said it was nice talking to me and offered to take me to a coffee place for some donuts while I waited. Stupidly, I accepted the offer and began to follow him. We approached the main doors. My oh shit radar went off and I abruptly stopped and told him I wouldn't come. He was very persistent about me coming and pointed to a truck in the parking lot, saying it was his, which freaked me out even more. He continued on his way, and I think about that interaction a lot, and I'm haunted by the what ifs. Maybe it was completely innocent. When I was about 6 years old, in kindergarten or first grade, I can't remember which, we lived across the street from my school. I mean right across the street. From our front window, the school property was the majority of what could be seen. I went to the school until my second grade year, when the school was shut down by the district. Most kids were shipped off to whatever school happened to be closest to them, and the abandoned property became a community center of sorts for the town of less than 200 people or so. I won't drop the name of this town, but I'll say it's somewhere in Illinois. That the estimated 200-person figure was in 1989, and that there are considerably fewer people now, as most of the population has either moved away or died, and several of the houses have burned down. Today, the town is even more dried up than it was during my kindergarten years. And the last time I visited, it looked as though nature was beginning the process of reclaiming it. I say all of this because it's important that you understand how small this town was. People didn't just randomly show up there. Strangers would be immediately recognized. There was nowhere for them to hide because the town only really had 3 streets. All but the end of one of them led out of town, and the lone end of the lone street that didn't offer an escape route led to a dead end with an ancient old cemetery. Another escape route, in a manner of speaking. This town had nothing but a post office, a couple of abandoned buildings that I'm fairly certain used to be general stores back in the distant past, and a payphone. Today, the post office is shut down and the payphone is gone. So keep all of this in mind when I say that a stranger or creep would have been noticed immediately. It's surprising then that I was almost abducted by a stranger in that town from directly in front of the school. Actually, I think I was abducted. That's the weird thing. When I left school that day, the man was standing in front of his vehicle, and he greeted me by name. That's what makes this even stranger. The man knew my name. He told me that my mom had sent him to pick me up for some reason or another. Though the memory of what he actually said is a bit hazy. It amounts to, "Your mom isn't at home. She sent me to pick you up and take you to where she is. Get in, and we'll go for a ride." You know, the usual creep thing. And I did. There are certain details I can't remember from this point. Why didn't I just look across the street to see if my mom's car was sitting in the driveway? Maybe I did. Where did I go? I don't know. What happened? I don't know. I have the briefest memories of me sitting in the passenger seat of his vehicle, saying something as we drove out of town. Can't remember what I said. Can't remember what he looked like. Can't remember why my next memory is of us back in my driveway, in the house, across from the school. I don't know if there's something that I've blocked out for the last 33 years. Maybe he took me somewhere and did something to me that creeps you to young trusting little boys, and I've just locked it up inside. I hope not. I hope he was some aspiring kidnapper with a conscience who just couldn't accept the enormity of the heinous sin he was about to commit and took me back home. That nothing bad happened to me. That my lack of memory is due more to the entire sequence of events being so uneventful that my little brain felt no need to keep it in storage. I've often wondered in some ways, like through some form of therapeutic hypnosis they show in movies and TV to unlock these memories, or if that's even a real thing. Or if it is, if I want to venture down that rabbit hole and discover what really happened, maybe things should just remain buried. I'm sure you've heard the expression, "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to." Yeah, I feel that applies here. And maybe someone will tell me it was just a vivid dream that a young child had remembered incorrectly as an actual memory. This is not the case. A few years back, I actually asked my mom about it. "Do you remember that strange man who took me from school and brought me back?" "Oh, yes." Apparently, I told her what happened because she told me about how she went over to the school and raised a bunch of hell over it. And that's all I have to prove to myself that it ever even happened. Up until then, I wondered if I imagined the whole thing. This is, unfortunately, no longer something that I can even attempt to convince myself is true. Who was that man? Why did he take me? Why did he bring me back? What happened that day? I'm a big fan of horror. I love a novel or movie about monsters. I'm an avid fan of Stephen King and creepypastas. But it isn't Pennywise, the dancing clown, or Slender Man that keeps me up at night sometimes. No, it's the real monster who almost gobbled me up when I was 6 years old and then lost his appetite. Thanks for listening. Update. For those of you asking if it was possibly my dad, I just called him and asked him. His response? "If it had been me, I wouldn't have taken you back. I would have just kept on driving and you would have gone to my state with me." That may sound like a joke, but it wasn't. So much for that theory. To give some context, I live in Italy, and usually cities' historical centers have mainly pedestrian zones and a few parking spots for residents. Last week, when my sister and I were walking the dog, we don't put her on a leash at night since she's trained and the streets are empty. Unfortunately, she saw a cat and ran away before my sister got her. My family loves that dog, so of course, we all went searching for her. My parents are divorced and we were staying at my mom's. Bad idea having 3 women in the streets at night, I know, but we didn't know what else to do. I was in my PJs with my phone running on low batteries, so without a flashlight, and just a few poles illuminating the streets. So it was quite dark. I was shouting my dog's name while we were looking for her, when a 40 to 50-year-old man, which I hadn't seen up to that point, said that he saw my dog running a few blocks away from where we were. My dumbass was so worried about the dog that I didn't even ask the guy what my dog looked like. I followed him in silence until we were near a parking spot, and he got really close to me and tried to put his hands around my back. At that point, I realized what was going on. I pushed him and sprinted as fast as I could. I know the place really well, so I hid where I knew he couldn't find me and texted my mom. I didn't call her in case he was near and could have heard me. A few minutes later, both my mom and my sister arrived together. We decided to call it a night and went home. That dog was waiting for us at the door. I don't know what this guy's intentions were, but I'm glad I reacted quickly and got away. This story isn't mine, it's my parents' story. My mom and dad got married in Mexico, then set off to cross the border. When they were saying farewell to everyone, my mom's grandma gave my mom a prayer, the Canticle of Mary, to keep her safe and to memorize. My great-grandma was a firm believer, and I guess it worked. As you know, people gather in small groups led by a coyote. They got stopped by bandits. I can't elaborate exactly where, cause my mom told me once, and I can't bring myself to ask her again due to the trauma I know she experienced. Tired, hungry, and thirsty, and even more scared than they already were, they all kneeled down on the ground in a row, arms over their head. These bandits proceeded to ransack everyone's money, valuables, and whatever the heck they wanted. Then they even started pulling up girls and women to take. My mom was praying hard. Sadly, the girl next to her got snatched up. My parents ended up making it safe and sound to the States, became US citizens, started a family, and worked hard. In high school, I would routinely run along the country roads near my family's house. One afternoon, a white pickup pulled over on the side of the road right next to me, basically stopping my run. A young guy said hi and asked if I needed a ride. I said no, but he insisted, remarking that it was hot, etc. Luckily, I was standing in a driveway and quickly began to walk up towards the house, telling him, "Oh, this is my house anyway. I better get home." He seemed to accept my excuse and drove away. I waited for a while, convinced that he'll come back and check, but he never did. I ran the rest of the way home, faster than I ever had, terrified that he would see me. This happened when I was 14. I attended a private Christian school and had a typical uniform of a white button-down blouse, shirt, and a knee-length plaid skirt. I walked to my bus stop, which was about 25 feet away from a major intersection, outside of a gas station. This older creepy white dude stops and tried to get me to come close to his car for directions. I stayed about 10 feet or so away from the car and gave him the directions. He kept trying to get me to come closer and offered me a ride to school. He even blocked traffic when the light turned green and made people go around him. He just wouldn't leave or stop, and my radar was going off like crazy. At that point, I backed up this incline and behind a sign thing, so he couldn't get close without giving me time to scream and run. At this point, another guy and the gas station employee, who recognized me, were walking towards us, and the guy took off. About 15 or so minutes later, I saw the guy approaching again, so I grabbed the other girl at my stop and told her to run. We both ran into the gas station store, and the employee called the police, which was absolutely useless, and the guy left again. I heard later that night on the news that a girl about my age was kidnapped from her bus stop, and the car was very similar to the one that the guy was driving. I was totally freaked out and was glad that we ran when we did. After that, one of my grandparents would drive me to the bus stop and stay with me until I got picked up. So today, my friends and I were on a walk, and at some point, I witnessed a scene that was likely a child kidnapping attempt. I'm really confused and a bit horrified right now, so I decided to post it here and hear some opinions about it. Here's the premise. I live in St. Petersburg, Russia. My friend and I often go for walks and mostly follow the same route through several building blocks, a settlement with private houses, and eventually a small park. At the edge of those building blocks, just before you enter the settlement located across the highway, we usually visit a store and buy some soda drinks. The place itself is kind of a poor neighborhood with old shabby buildings and infrastructure. I live near that place, and some of my friends live right there, so I know it pretty well. Now what happened today, we decided to visit the store, and usually we enter together, but this time I had forgot my mask, so I waited for him outside. Soon after, 3 boys rushed from the store. They were actively talking with each other, and then 2 of them, first one was about 6 or 7 years old, and the second one was around 5, stepped back into the store, but the third one stayed near the store's doors. Those 2 kids started calling for the third one to go back in with them, very confident. At this point, I didn't really pay too much attention to them. After the third one declined and started saying that he's not allowed to leave the store, it would turn out that his mom was working as a cashier and wanted him to stay in the store during her work shift. Those kids continued asking him to follow them. Then the first kid said the phrase that gave me chills and made me turn around to them and stare, ready to make an action to prevent the third kid from going with them. He said, "I know the place where your mom will allow you to go." Aside from the weirdness of the phrase, it also sounded very unnatural and learned. Then both of them started saying this again and again. I was about 7 to 10 meters away, and they likely noticed me, so they stopped calling him, and the first kid asked the third kid how old he was. He replied he was 6. Immediately after the answer, the 2 kids ran away to the building block. Honestly, I was hoping to stop these kids and ask them about their parents and what they were trying to do, and notify the store personnel, but they faded away really fast. Soon enough, my friends came back from the store, and I told him what I just saw. He mentioned that he actually noticed those kids inside trying to make friends with the son of the cashier, and they were basically talking about normal stuff that kids of their age were interested in. It's unclear when they decided to exit the store and go to the place with the third kid. We both were very concerned about the situation, and shortly after I came to the store to warn the personnel about it. I told one of the cashiers everything and mentioned the first kid was holding a sweeps can. She confirmed she saw them, thanked me, and she said she's going to tell this to his mother. I then left the store. Child kidnappings that involve kids of their own age were common in Russia 5 to 8 years ago, and I even remember a case involving a small girl back in Moscow. Luckily it didn't work for whoever was the kidnapper. The situation really shocked me, and I would like to believe that those were just ordinary kids, which unintentionally used bizarre words, but it just doesn't seem real anyway. This isn't an entirely too creepy story, but it really had me freaked out. For context, I live in a university-owned dorm about a mile from the main campus, and they have a shuttle service that takes you to and from the campus and to this particular dorm. I'm 21 and female. I got together with my friend on Labor Day for a barbecue and had a little too much to drink. I was still pretty coherent, but it would be obvious to anyone that I wasn't totally with it. Around 10 p.m., my friend, also 21 and female, walked me to the shuttle and stopped and waited for me to get on until she headed back to her dorm. As I was on the shuttle, I couldn't shake this feeling that I was being watched. But there were only about 4 people on the shuttle, so I assumed I was just being paranoid, as well as drunk. However, that changed when I noticed a guy, 20-ish, sitting on the other side of the bus about 2 seats ahead of me, who kept looking at me. I was uncomfortable but ignored it, because I would be home and in my dorm soon. The shuttle drops us off and we get into the elevator. Myself first and the guy second. I push the button to my floor and he looks but doesn't press a number, which freaks me out. I'm still hoping for the best and tell myself he just lives on the same floor. Of course, the other 2 people in the elevator get off before myself and the guy, and my dorm is the last room on the floor, furthest from the elevator. We both get off on my floor. I get off first, and I start walking. I look back and he's deadlocked on me, so I start to panic and walk faster, and so does he. Finally, I put my card out and practically sprint to my door as he began to sprint. I got in and slammed my door behind me and locked it. After giving myself a minute, I looked at the people, and he is sitting across the hall from my door, just staring at my door. He did this for about 7 to 10 minutes before muttering something to himself and leaving. I ended up calling one of my male friends to come to my room and make sure he still wasn't lurking around in the hall somewhere. Again, not too entirely creepy or exciting, but definitely scary at night, alone. Hey, so I don't know if this is going to be all that creepy to you guys, but to me, it was pretty unsettling. I'm a 25-year-old female. I was out last Wednesday night with my friends till 2 a.m. Now to add context, I live in a city, and all my friends just live outside of it, so I decided to head home by myself as the rest of them had a lot further to go, and I didn't want to impede them any more than necessary. So we say our goodbyes and I head off home, which give or take is about 10 minutes away via walk. Now there's 2 roads I can go down. One is the main road and can still be quite busy at this time of night because it's got a couple kebab shops and a taxi rank, but my dumb self decided to head down the other road, which was a quiet residential road. So as I'm walking minding my own business, watching drunk people stumble past me, when suddenly I'm completely by myself on this badly lit street. So I'm feeling a little anxious and pick up speed. Then I relax as I hear a car slightly behind me, because slightly drunk me thinks that's a good thing. Wrong. The car pulls up next to me and the driver rolls down the window. "Hey, nice night. What's your name?" I just look at him and keep walking. This weirdo drives alongside me and repeatedly asks me for my name for at least a good minute, and I try to ignore him and speed up, but he just won't leave me alone. Eventually I just say my name and then he goes, "That's a nice name, have a good night," and speeds off into the darkness. Now I'm panicking and I'm all but running home, constantly checking over my shoulder in case he decides to follow me. I got home safe, but nevertheless I can't shake off how creepy he was and how vulnerable I actually was. I would say that in the moment he did that, I immediately put my live location on for my friends to follow just in case, but still, never thought I could end up in that kind of situation. This was about 2 years ago, and I was the only one here for the later half. My girlfriend and her mother were all at the mall, shopping for her father's birthday, which was coming up soon. I was with her brothers at their house. While walking about the mall, 2 creeps started talking to them. When they told them to go away, they didn't stop. They followed them and tried catcalling them. And when my girlfriend and her mother got to the car, they did the same thing and got in their own, tailing them relentlessly. It was during the ride home that she called me, and I told her brothers about the situation. Now understandably, all 3 of us were very pissed and left the house. As my girlfriend and her mother pull up into the driveway, the 2 creeps parked down the road, take out their phones and presumably took down the address, and then drove off before we could do anything. I went home, but was back at their house the same time the next day, and there they were, outside their house calling out to them. That was until the dad, understandably pissed off, went out with his firearm and told them to book it in a very extreme way. Those two have been seen again and again, but the last time I saw them trying to approach her, I think I made it very clear that they were going to be reported to the police if they tried again. Last time I saw them was about 2 weeks ago, although I was alone then. Around 2007, I was getting my PhD at the University of Florida. I'm a female in my 30s. I lived in Gainesville in a condo that I owned by myself. I had a friend who was walking across the United States. We'll call him Captain. Captain decided to spend the winter at my house, so he got a mutual friend to drive him from Alabama, where he had last stopped walking, to my house in Gainesville. We had a pleasant Thanksgiving, and then the captain just kinda chilled at my house for the next couple months. It wasn't too big of a deal, because I mostly stayed at my boyfriend's house, but it was a little bit much. When it was time for him to get back to walking, he asked me if I would drive him back to the same exact location he had left in Alabama. Looking forward to having my house back, I agreed to drive him one day when I was out of school. I don't remember what route we took or where it was, but I remember the drive wasn't that long, relatively speaking. It seems like it should have been, but I'll guess it was about a 5 or 6 hour. I dropped him off in the early evening and headed back to Florida. This meant driving all night by myself in an unknown part of the country. Conveniently, the GPS technology that we had at the time gave me an extremely backwards route back to Florida. To get where I had dropped off Captain, we stayed on the freeway for most of the time, and then it was about 10 miles off the freeway. Well, Google Maps or whatever app I was using decided that the faster way was to take me through all these back roads through the Alabama backcountry. Serious Deliverance vibes. So I'm already a little freaked out and occasionally checking in with my boyfriend to let him know where I am. I've driven at night alone tons, but my history with respect to strangers has made me hypervigilant. At some point, I became aware of this car behind me. I didn't assume that anything was weird until the car stayed with me for several miles. Again, I shoved it off as maybe Google Maps giving them the same weird route, but because I was paying attention to the car behind me, I didn't notice when I pulled through some small town that I was taking a left at the wrong intersection. There were two intersections very close together, and I was accidentally in the left lane to turn left at the intersection right before the one I was supposed to turn at. No biggie, I figured. It's like 2 in the morning, so when the light changed, I just drove straight through the intersection and took the left at the next intersection. The car behind me did the same thing. I realized at that point that I was definitely being followed. I immediately called my boyfriend and asked him to look up the non-emergency police number for the area I was in. I tried to give him my nearest location, but like any dude who has never been a victim of any kind of assault, he thought I was overreacting. He was in the middle of something, and therefore he didn't look up the number for me. In retrospect, I should have absolutely called 911, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of something that could have been nothing. But nothing was quickly becoming something indeed, because I had been on the back roads in Alabama without a gas station for a long time, and my car was in need of gas. That meant I would have to exit the vehicle at a gas station that was probably not well manned at this time of night, by myself. I was low-key freaking out. It didn't help that I couldn't see the driver in the car behind me. It was dark, and the car had dark tinted windows. Also, Alabama backwood roads are pretty damn dark. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, but I couldn't get a glimpse of the driver. I honestly couldn't figure out why this person targeted me, and at first I laughed it off to some kind of Southern football vendetta. I had a UF license plate frame, Go Gators, and was trying to convince myself that this person was just trying to scare me because I liked one of our rival schools. Given that I'm a tall woman, it would have been difficult to identify that I was a woman in the car. But either way, this person was clearly following me, and given that I had to stop my car, I was feeling increasingly at risk. Finally, my woods route took me to a relatively larger metropolitan area. I was finally on a street with streetlights and businesses were still lit up. I started to feel safer, but still had to stop for gas. I had already made a plan as far as that was concerned, but I wanted this guy behind me to know that I was onto him. So at the first intersection that was well lit, I turned fully around in my car and stared at him while pretending to talk on the phone. I did this for the entire time the light was red. I wanted it to look like I was describing the car and its features to whoever was on the phone. Not long after this, I found a gas station that was well lit up. I was driving on fumes and praying that I wouldn't run out of gas in the backwoods of Alabama. I pulled into the gas station so that my driver's side door was adjacent to the door of the gas station. I jumped out and ran inside. I let the attendant know that I was being followed. He walked out from behind the counter and walked to the window and said no one was out there. I was sure that the car had been behind me when I pulled into the gas station, but seeing that I ran inside, they must have driven off. I still have no idea what this guy's intention was, but he followed me for easily an hour and a half, like 100 miles. It felt predatory as hell. Thankfully, I was able to gas up my car under the watchful eye of the gas station attendant, and the attendant told me the quickest way to the freeway. My trip was uneventful after that, but I was still shaking and thoroughly pissed off at my boyfriend for not taking me seriously. Stay safe out there. I'm a relatively small 19-year-old girl. Just a few hours ago, I was on my way home, leaving the train station near where I live. It was already dark outside and not too many people were around. Normally that wouldn't creep me out, because this area is quite peaceful, but today someone followed me for a good 5 minutes. So right after I left the train station, I noticed this young man walking in my direction. I thought he was headed towards the trains and didn't pay it any mind. I lit up my cigarette and went on my way, somewhat weary because I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but because I was wearing solid boots, my steps were too loud to make out anything really. Also, I did just walk away from a train and towards a big street, so it's not unusual that people headed in the same direction. After quite some time, I heard a soft, "Excuse me," behind me. Then it got a bit louder, "Excuse me." I turned around to see the same dude that went into the opposite direction at the station. He's walking behind me, slowly getting closer, and stops about a meter away from me, still tall enough to tower over me. I'm frozen in place, grabbing my umbrella a bit tighter, making myself look as big and confident as I can, as he breaks his silence with the most ridiculous question. "Do you have a boyfriend?" No, but now that you ask, yes." He kind of stands there for a second, then turns around and walks away. I was scared shitless at that moment. On the rest of the way home, I turned around 3 or 4 times because I did not want him to follow me and know where I lived. I eventually got home safe and nothing happened to me. I don't know, maybe he just wanted to ask if I was single, and maybe he had my number. But dude, it's freaking dark outside and you followed me for quite some time. No, just no. That's fucking creepy as hell. Don't be like this guy, please. Just don't. Yesterday, I popped into a Tesco in my town as I was making spagbol and realized I had no onions. Usually I wear a mask, but my nephew had left his teeny chocolate handprints on my white mask, so it was in the washing machine. When I was literally grabbing onions and paying with a card, masks are no longer required here. I'm just paranoid as I live with someone high risk. As I walk in, a guy who's probably a little shorter than me also walks in at the same time. He smiles and says hi to me. I'm a smiley person and will be friendly to anyone, so I say hi back and smile and walk on. He goes down the crisps and chocolate aisle, and I head to the meals and veggies. Out of the corner of my eye, I can see his head follow me as I walk past. I know I'm a pretty girl, but I'm also relatively large, and while I do get attention from men, not usually so full on watching me kind of thing. I thought nothing of it at this time. It was a little flattering. So I got my onions and walked to the till. The man stood directly in front of me. No issues until he turned around and smiled at me. I smiled back and looked away. I kid you not, guys. He starts doing lunges, like actual lunges in front of me. Then stretching his leg behind his back and twisting his torso to look back at me. I am pretty uncomfortable at this point, so I'm avidly reading the wine rack. There's this wine called beefsteak wine, and I'm super confused as to why it's called that. I don't drink. Is it beef flavored wine? Is it made for beef and steak preparings? God help me, it's the latter. All while this guy is still lunching and twisting and trying to smile at me. Finally, the old dear in front has all her stuff in her granny trolley and shuffles off. The man in front buys his cigarettes and chocolate bar and goes and stands by the front door. I'm feeling super uncomfortable at this point because he's literally staring at me while I'm buying my onions. I pay and go for the door, again avoiding eye contact and just acting like I was in my own little world, but he doesn't seem to take the hint. He stops me at the door. He says, "Hi, I'm John Smith. Can I get your number?" I deadpan just say no and start walking to my car. Not sure what happened next, but a second later, an older gentleman with his West Highland Terrier has stepped in between us and said, "The girl said no, leave her be." I thank the old man, avoiding the other guy's eyes, and go to my car. He ran to his van and gets in and waits. I just had a bad feeling at this point, so I drive out of the car park and go the opposite way of my house. Thinking back, it was probably a really stupid move of mine because I drove in the direction of nowhere. Like, the next town is 30 miles in the direction I drove, with tons of small villages in between, the nearest being 9 miles away. Like I said, not smart. And just as my instinct said he would, he starts to follow me. He's in a white van and I'm in a little car, so the windy roads and random side lanes did come in handy. I ended up driving 17 miles out of my way in a giant semicircle to get home. He followed me for at least 8 of them before he lost me, going up a large bendy hill that opens onto a blind crossroad. Just to ensure I wasn't being paranoid, I had taken turns that made no sense, and pretty much done a circle before driving onwards. It started out as a semi-flattering thing in the supermarket, and it turned into me nearly killing us both, speeding around tight corners, scared to stop. I honestly don't understand the entitlement of people that think this behavior is acceptable. I do have his number plate. I'm probably going to report him to the police, to be honest. I have the entire thing on dash cam. Edit. I did report this to the police this afternoon. Second update. Today I have an unfortunate and pretty terrifying update from my perspective. When I called the police, they basically said they would look into things, but since he can argue that he was just driving, they most likely can't do much beyond telling him not to come near me again. That night, I got a call from a police officer from a city 20 miles away from my town. She said she couldn't give me a lot of details, but she said the guy that followed me is currently going through criminal proceedings for doing something similar to another girl. She wanted my consent to pass on my details to a lawyer. I honestly didn't know how to react or what to think, but of course I said yes. Today I got a call from the lawyer. I did not get a huge amount of details, but basically, she told me that the same man who I had my encounter with had stalked another young woman, and he had attempted to abduct her. I have no more details beyond this, but she said that my encounter was very similar in nature, and it was caught on camera. Providing my account could collaborate with the victim and the attempted abduction account, and provide a narrative of what this guy's MO is. I gave her my statement. She has the video footage that was passed on by the police officer I spoke with from the city 20 miles away. Her team will be looking into my encounter as a part of a larger investigation, so I very well may make another update in the future. But for now, I know it's not a lot of information, but it was still pretty terrifying to be told the guy that followed me from the supermarket actually tried, and who knows, maybe even succeeded in abducting women before. This happened during my first year at community college, and I always drove this crappy 1996 Toyota Corolla to my classes. This car was barely holding itself together, and I had to replace a part that broke at least once a month. At 60 miles per hour, the whole car would start to vibrate. But I lived 10 minutes away from my campus and my job, so it got me where I needed to go. One day, I got back from one of my classes, and I noticed someone had broken into my car and misplaced all my possessions. My registration card, homework, tire gauge, and various objects had been thrown under my seat or stuffed in weird places. The rearview mirror had been turned completely vertical. Nothing had been stolen, which I thought was really weird, but also glad because I thought whoever did this was just doing it for a laugh or trying to mess with me. I started parking on the complete opposite side of the campus, but it happened again with the same situation. Everything in my car was just thrown around and nothing was stolen. The first time this happened, I was returning to my car from class and saw streamers and confetti all across my windshield. There were pieces of construction paper placed on my windshield wipers that said, in all caps, "We're always watching you," with a winky face. Now this started to really freak me out. At first, I thought it might be one of my friends playing a prank on me, so I asked all of them over the next few days if they had been breaking into my car and messing around with my stuff. However, none of them knew what I was talking about. I know how my friends are too. I know if I would have asked them about this, and they were indeed the culprit, they would have broken into laughter saying, "Dude, we totally got you." None of them knew what I was talking about though. I told them that if it was really one of them, that they needed to let me know, because if it was a stranger, I was going to have to get campus security involved. I never felt the need to get them involved any sooner, because none of my possessions had been stolen, and this felt more like a practical joke. Things started to get really weird with the confetti, streamers, and note though. A few weeks passed and the pranks had stopped, much to my relief. I thought that this probably had to be a stranger pulling pranks on me, until one night I was leaving campus after getting out of my night class. I was driving down the highway that I always took to get to my neighborhood and noticed I was being tailgated harder than I've ever been tailgated in my entire life. This truck came out of nowhere and was blasting the high beams and seemed to be a foot away from the back of my car. I was immediately freaked out and thought, to hell with the law, and booked it to my house, going 90 miles per hour down the highway. The road was pretty clear and there were no cops, and they luckily lost their tail. The following week, the same situation occurred, leaving my night class and this truck encountering me on the highway and blasting their high beams. I was so sick of the pranks, the stalking, and all of this nonsense. I had finally had it with whoever was doing all this stupid crap, so I legit slowed down to 10 miles per hour just to annoy them. I didn't care that all the other cars on the road were honking and giving me the finger for going so damn slow on the highway that had a speed limit of 65. I really wanted to give whoever the hell this was a taste of their own medicine. No joke, they followed me going 10 miles per hour for what felt like 10 minutes. I couldn't figure out what this person was getting out of this situation, but after 10 minutes I swerved into the next lane and sped off in the distance, having finally gotten sick of my own little prank. After this, my car was never messed with again, and I believe I may have encountered them only one more time on that same highway. I began to drop below 30 miles per hour and they immediately swerved into the other lane, just like they had the last time. Then finally, all of a sudden, all the stalking and pranks had finally stopped. I eventually moved out of my old town so I could attend the university I was transferring to. I even traded in my old Corolla for a Honda Civic in much better condition and with a different license plate. To this day, I don't know who these people were or what they wanted from me. It could have all been harmless, but the fact that I was being followed on my way home from campus made me feel like these people wanted something more from me. If I had let them follow me to my home, I have no idea what would have happened. I know I should have gone to campus security or the police about the situation, but after the stalking stopped and I moved away, I forgot about it for a while. Maybe it all was really just a harmless prank, but there's no way I could be completely certain, making this an extremely creepy experience for me. This happened a long time ago. I don't exactly remember when, but it was sometime when I was around 8 years old. I'm 20 now. My dad worked overseas most of the time, so it was just usually me, my mom, and my late older brother who passed away some years ago at our house. She was just a typical office worker, and whenever it was the end of the month, she tended to go home much later since they were computing overall sales for the month. She doesn't know how to drive even though we had a car, because she never had the time to learn. My dad tried teaching her before, but they just ended up arguing about it. Also, it was very hard to find parking space near her office since there wasn't a parking lot there, and usually cars were always parked alongside the road by the time she arrived to her office. One night at the end of the month, she ended up leaving her office around 1 a.m. Where I live, we usually rode on tricycles for transport, and she got on one and proceeded to tell them where she was headed to. On the way there, the tricycle stopped for another passenger. A man gets in, so basically my mom ended up being stuck in the inner part of the tricycle between the guy and the driver. My mom felt like the guy was trying to scooch closer to her. She felt very uncomfortable since she also felt him eyeing her legs. After some time, at some point, she couldn't take it anymore. Luckily on the way home there's a police station along the way, so she decided to get off there when they passed through it to find another tricycle ride home. She managed to find one and got home safe, if only the night ended there. Unfortunately, a little while later, me and my brother were both asleep on the bed and my mom was changing her clothes and washing up. She felt a breeze, and when she turned around and looked at the curtains, she saw the same exact guy who rode with her earlier, standing just outside the window, watching her intently. Somehow he managed to follow her to our house. He climbed the fence in the backyard and slid the window open. His hand was also inside, pushing the curtains aside to have a better look at her. Luckily, the windows at our house had thick metal bars, so he couldn't just enter if he had broken the glass. But it was still terrifying seeing a random guy standing there, nonetheless. She screamed loudly and me and my brother were both woken because she was snatching us from the bed. My mom was terrified since the bed was near the window, meaning me and my bro were pretty much in reach. She was throwing stuff out the window while running into the living room, screaming bloody murder, asking help from our neighbors. Unfortunately, he got away. After that, she squeezed in some time to learn how to drive properly and has been going to and from work in a car ever since, even if she had to get up earlier to get a parking space. She also had a hard time sleeping for a while because she was paranoid. She had all her fences made higher and put some barbed wire along the top to make it harder to climb. She ended up asking some of the other family members to stay over for a bit since she was scared of us three being alone. She considered filing a report, but she didn't have much info on her about either of them, sadly. Thankfully, nothing more happened after that. I wish I could tell you that we moved since then, but no, we're still living here since we can't really afford to move. Years later, we ended up talking about it when I recalled that night and asked her what happened. She mentioned how she found the driver suspicious too, since he literally refused to let her down at the police station and insisted on bringing her all the way home, but my mom refused to back down and she got out. I may not have been aware of what happened that night, but my mom's desperate screams linger in my mind. It hurts to listen to it, and I never want to hear it again. I hope she never has to go through something like that again. This happened a few years ago. This was a time in late August when there was a high chance of seeing falling stars. Me and some of my friends, we were 18, decided to go one night and watch. In the end, it was only 4 of us. Nicole borrowed her father's car. It was one of those that had a big open back space, the type that could be used to deliver furniture and such, so we could just sit in the open back space and watch the sky from there. Pat ordered some pizzas and brought some wine and cola with her. She's the type that likes to chill like that. And the 4th person is Flower, who I consider the hero of this story. So we decided to go out to the field next to the city because we can see the stars better if there's no street lights. Apart from the dirt road, there were a lot of bushes around, so we were happy that we didn't have to sit on the ground in the dark. When we were sitting out there, we noticed we could hear faint music in the distance. At that time, there were a lot of small city festivals where people played live music, so we didn't really think too much of it. It was around 11 p.m. We ate some pizza and drank some wine. Of course, Nicole only drank cola. She was the driver. At this point, we spent 2 hours out there. Pat was getting a little tipsy, and we were starting to get loud, laughing and enjoying our summer. I remember Pat was telling us one of her jokes, and we were all laughing when I glanced over to Flower, and in the faint light of her phone, I saw that she wasn't laughing. She seemed bothered by something. "What's wrong, Flower?" I asked her while the other two were still giggling. "Nothing, doesn't this music sound like it's a recording to you?" This was the point when we all froze and stayed quiet. And she was right. The music we heard before, that we had forgot about within the 2 hours we spent there, sounded like a recording. "Doesn't it sound like it's getting closer?" Nicole whispered. And it did get more and more louder. This was the point where we decided to get out of there. We didn't even climb downward from the car's back area to get in the car. Nicole just jumped down and ran to the other door. She started the car within seconds. This time the music became very loud as we drove off, and we saw 3 men running out of the bushes. One of them had their phone glowing. We assumed it was where the music was coming from. As we reached the side of the city, Nicole stopped. We jumped off and got into the car. After that, she took us all home. We didn't talk much about it. I think we all felt foolish about the situation. To this day, I'm very grateful that Flower has such sensitive hearing and Nicole acted so quickly. As for the 3 men, we don't know who they were, why they were hiding in the bushes for hours, and why they were playing music in the middle of nowhere. Why didn't they come out sooner if they wanted something? That's what I always wondered. Then an idea hit me and it gives me chills. In the safety of thinking we were alone, we were speaking loudly in the field. We mentioned that we were sad that others couldn't come, and we also mentioned the wine sometimes. What if these guys were just waiting for us to get drunk? This happened many years ago around Christmas time. I ran to Kmart. Told you it was a long time ago because I'm pretty sure that Kmart isn't even around anymore. I was grabbing some decorations for the tree and decided to Christmas shop a little. I had my youngest son with me in a stroller and was taking my time since my husband had our other 2 boys with him. I was in the kids' shoe department and I noticed a man looking at shoes. He was kind of disturbing and loud because he kept pulling boxes out and pushing them back in. I quietly walk away. The next department I go to, I noticed that he appeared a few moments later. This just kept happening and I was starting to get a gut feeling, but thought I was being crazy. I was a young mom, only 24, young and naive. I ended up going to the toy section to look for some gifts that my boys were asking for. That's when I noticed that he was circling the aisle. He went past the end, staring at me from one end. Then a moment later, he would pass the other. I hurried out of the aisle and found the first employee I could. I went up to her and started crying, telling her that this man, she saw him pass the aisle because he was still doing it and told her he was following me. She called security and he quickly exited the store. They walked me over to my car and I went home and told my husband the story. We called the police and an officer came to my house to take down the info. He said I was lucky because they were probably after me or my baby and would have made a move when I left. I still needed the Christmas tree items that I originally went for, so my husband went to Walmart with me. Almost immediately I saw the man again. He was on the prowl for someone else. My husband grabbed a security guard and they chased him. The guy saw me, so he knew what was going on and ran. Since it was Christmas time in the busy Walmart, he got away. Always trust your gut and be aware of your surroundings. It's been 20 years and I still think about that frightening man and what could have happened. Hi, this is my first post, so I'll do my best to make this sound interesting. This happened to me in the summer of 2015. I was dating a guy who lived in the city, and I was living at home at the time, in the suburbs. Neither of us had a car, and since I lived at home with my bedroom right next to my grandma's, I always went to him. I'd take the subway to his place every week and stay there for a couple days if I had off from work. To get to his apartment, it required taking 2 trains. One day I was headed to see him. It was super hot out and I was wearing a skirt with straps, a crop top, and knee-high socks. Hey, I wanted to look cute. I guess I feel this is important as I probably stood out in this outfit, and unfortunately I probably should have been more careful about what I was wearing, which sucks. Anyway, I'm on the first train, and after a few stops I noticed a man get on. I kind of couldn't not notice him, as he chose to stand right in front of where I was sitting and stare at me, rather than taking an empty seat. It made me feel weird. The man in general gave me very creepy vibes. He was probably in his 40s, looked unkempt, but otherwise just a basic looking white dude, whose face I couldn't even picture now. So I get off at the last stop and head through the station to get where I need to go to catch the second train. I noticed this guy's following me, which at first I figured was not a big deal. He could have just been going to the same place. So to get to the platform I needed to be, you have to go up some stairs, and I realized he's right behind me. I decided to turn around and go up a different platform, which happened to be packed with people, thinking that if he follows me this is bad, but I could lose him in the crowd. He follows me and I try to duck out of view before going back to the actual platform I needed to be on. I get there and for a few minutes I feel better, until I see him again. He must have known I would be there, as I was about to go up there and then turn around. Plus it was the only other platform, and most likely he saw me the whole time. There weren't too many people waiting compared to the other side, but a few trains came that were full, so I didn't bother to try to get on, and neither did he. The whole time I was texting my boyfriend, who was not taking me seriously at all. I asked him to at least meet me at the station when I got to the stop by his apartment, a 5-minute walk. He was being reluctant, but agreed finally. At this point, I'm still waiting for the train. One comes that's very full, but I'm getting restless, and when I get to a safe place, I squeeze on, and so does the man right next to me, his arm all over me. I decide that even with all these people around, I'm not safe, so right before the doors close, I hop out of the train. The train leaves with this guy staring at me as it pulled away. I waited a few more trains to come and go, worried that the guy would be waiting for me at the next stop or something. I got on a train finally, paying attention to everyone who got on at each stop. He never did, and I made it to my stop and was greeted by my boyfriend, who seemed put out by having to walk over. He is now an ex-boyfriend, and generally kinda shitty. I'm really proud of myself for getting off that train at the last second. I don't know how much danger I was in, but I know this man was following me, and it definitely wasn't for any wholesome reasons. Despite being in public, I feel like if he tried anything, no one would have done shit, and I'm a very small and not strong person. I want to start by saying that I'm not actually sure if I should be scared about what happened. But anyway, I am. And all of this happened a few hours ago, and I can't shake the feeling that I was in danger off of me. I usually walk my dog around midnight or half past midnight. I like the fact that I'm alone, and I am allowed to take off my mask. Sometimes my mom comes with me, sometimes my mom goes alone, or sometimes I go alone. However, it's me most of the time alone. If a car drives by me, I just make sure that they don't stop, and that's that. Not gonna lie, I've had bad scares, but it's mostly because it's dark and I'm a woman. But I tell myself to calm down. Not everyone is bad, or why would it do it to me? Well, tonight I walked my dog alone, and when I was walking the way back to the house, my dog stops, and I thought she wanted to do something. A car drives by, and even though there's nothing weird about the car, I just kept an eye on it. The road is a one-way, and yes, it had to pass where I live, but it stopped right in front of the portal. I got a weird sensation in my stomach and decided not to walk on that side of the sidewalk closest to where they were parked. I walked the opposite direction of where they were and my house, but my dog wanted to go back home, so we turned around. Suddenly, my mom started calling me, asking me where I was. She was in the same area that I was, but on the other sidewalk. She crossed the road, and I saw the car was no longer in front of my house, which for some reason didn't sit well with me. Then I calmed down because there was a similar car parked a bit behind where I had seen the other. My mom told me that the car that parked in front of the house had 2 men inside, and they started driving really slowly when she came out. The driver looked directly at her and said, "Oh, there goes the bodyguard," and then drove off. Now, I try not to get scared because at first I thought that they were just talking to each other, and my mom overheard a part of the conversation, and she was overthinking it. But then I realized that the man was looking at her, and the fact that they drove away with no reason. Maybe I'm just being dramatic or crazy over nothing, but he looked at my mom while saying that. I can't stop thinking if they knew who my mom was and why she was on the street at that time. I could think of 2 situations. Someone who lives closer knows us and has seen my late walking routine, or someone who has been driving around enough times to know who you are and your late night walking routine. Either situation, I don't like them one bit. I just want to walk my dog alone with no problems. The other weird thing that happened is a few minutes after they left, a neighbor walked out and said hi to my mom and me. And we said hi back, and he said, "Bye, Ashley," louder than his first hi. Now I know I'm overthinking this, but I see no reason to say hi to both of us and then give a bye only to me. But this is a guy who has been asking me out since 2015 and has always gotten a no in response, and he never stopped. This past year, he started asking for hugs and even kisses. Lucky me, I have a global situation on my part that I used as an excuse, along with saying no. At first, I did not mind him asking me out, but I've become uncomfortable with the fact that he doesn't take no for an answer and keeps asking and asking, thinking that being persistent is gonna get him somewhere. What made me get weary of him is the last time I told him no, I could see the anger in his face. I was inside a lift and he took a few seconds to move so the doors wouldn't close, and was just looking at me. Suddenly he smiled and took a step back, and I was left asking myself, what? I've known this guy for 20 years and he's never looked at me like that. Also, I wanted to add that I live in the worst part of the city, but 20 years of living here, I'm used to the neighbors selling drugs, people coming to buy them, shouting at 5 a.m., but I never felt scared till recently with this neighbor, and tonight with whatever was with those 2 men in the car. I still don't understand why they were looking at my mom while saying that. I'm trying to tell myself that I'm exaggerating here, but can't shake this odd feeling. A part of me wants to keep on walking at midnight just to see if it happens again, but then I don't want to challenge my luck here. I went for a run to the park, and I took a lap around the park. I was gonna go to the restroom after I finished my 1 lap. This dude passed me on my way to the bathroom. As soon as I passed him, he turned around and followed me into the restroom. I saw him and I thought, hell no, I just passed the bathroom and didn't go inside. Then I walked in the direction to take another lap, and he Terminator stared me down, walking right at me. Again I thought, hell no, so I turned around to take a lap the opposite way. He followed me. Again I turned around to run the opposite way. He followed me. And 2 more times he did this. After the last time, he went to go get something from his truck. The truck had a camper in the back, and it looked like he pulled out a knife or something, so I booked it and started sprinting. He finally actually started walking the whole lap and following me. I called my mom to pick me up and she came in 3 minutes. But when she picked me up and we went back to look for his car, he had left. Mind you, I'm 17. Pretty burly dude. I'm 5'8", 165. It was about 6:30 and the park was completely full of people. I was shitting bricks, and this only happened an hour ago, so I'm still scared as shit. What do you guys think? Because as a guy, I didn't think this would ever happen, especially not at my age. I'm a grown fucker. Shitting bricks, I need some kind of weapon, because I'm gonna be paranoid for the rest of my life. For a little context, I live in a town where nothing ever happens. My 19-year-old sister and I, a 17-year-old female, were spending the night at a nearby city in her boyfriend's apartment. I had a bottle of wine with me that I got in for a birthday gift, and she had a couple of ciders. Note, the legal drinking age in my country is 18, but pretty much everyone drinks before that. She had been drinking for years and could handle herself. We had a day of shopping, food, movies, etc., and in the evening we had some drinks. Eventually we went out when it was already dark because she wanted food. We were walking for about 2 to 3 miles next to a 2-lane road that has cars going by every now and then. We were just having fun talking and enjoying the night air, as the city was on a smaller side, and we didn't feel like we would have to be afraid of being out after dark. This country is generally pretty safe for women. Well, at some point, my sister and I grew quiet as we noticed an old car come from behind us and slowed down when they got to our side. Luckily, they were on the 3rd lane from us, so it's not like they could just grab us or anything. It was very creepy nonetheless, because there was nothing ahead of him for him to slow down like that. It was clear that he slowed down to slowly drive his car at our pace. I just looked forward to try to make him lose interest, but my sister kept glancing at the car and whispered to me that it was a middle-aged man and he was trying to wave to us. I switched sides with her so that she would be hidden from the guy and told her to ignore him so that he'll lose interest. She was pretty shaken up about it all. The car followed us for a little longer, and I was eyeing the roads and the buildings to our left, just in case we needed to run. But then the guy just started speeding off. We kept glancing over our shoulders for a while, but didn't see him again that night. It might not be that creepy compared to what could have happened, but to us it was. Of course, there's always these old drunks walking around, whistling at girls, but this is the first time I felt scared because of something like that. I'm a 30-year-old female. I have a 31 kg German Shepherd, 10 months old. She's an absolute nightmare to walk during the day as she hates other dogs, so I walk her anytime between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. She used to hate people, but I trained her out of it 3 months back, and she would generally ignore people these days as long as they wait to be allowed forward with a handshake from me. We live in a small village in the middle of nowhere, and our estate is on the edge of this village. Our usual route is up and down the estate onto the main road, and then we follow it through the village and back. Usually takes about 30 to 45 minutes, depending if she's stopping to sniff every blade of grass. A couple weeks ago we went out for a walk a bit later than usual, so it was pitch black. We got on the main road and she sits while I check before we cross. I noticed headlights in the distance leading out of the village. The car was parked, which was strange, as there's nothing up there but fields and cattle. Callie has also clocked it. We crossed the road, but Callie was leaning around me, keeping her eyes on it. I'll mention she doesn't like cars either, so I thought she was just prepping herself to chase it. We were walking in the opposite direction, and she kept turning around like every 2 minutes. I then noticed that it had slowly been driving up and crawling behind us. I stopped to look, thinking they might be lost and need directions. This is when I noticed 4 men in the car staring at me and my dog. Enter creepy chills. The car sped up a little and then pulled over to the side of the road and parked. Callie and I stopped. I was about to cross to the other side of the road when all 4 men got out of the car and looked at us. Callie lost her mind. She lunged as far as the leash would allow, growling, snarling, and barking. The 2 men closest to us immediately got back in the car, and the other 2 paused until Callie started pulling the leash, trying to get at them. One shakes his head and gets back into the car, and the other shortly follows. The car then speeds off. As soon as they were gone, Callie sits and looks up at me, tongue out and everything, like she hadn't just been rabid a moment earlier. She got extra fish treats that night. I have no idea what might have happened had Callie not been the way she is. I still walk her at night, safe in the knowledge that I have a 68-pound death machine with me. I sort of forgot about this whole thing until recently, but this took place over 10 years ago when I was 15 or 16. I was just a bored teen in a somewhat small town and wanted to get off the computer for a bit. So it was late at night, maybe around midnight. Someone like me should have stayed in, but I felt like going for a long walk, which I never did. But hey, what's gonna happen to me here? It was a chill place. Once you get past the school in the neighborhood, or to the one end of the neighborhood, there's a long road with some nice houses on it that leads towards a grocery store, and a bigger road with 4 lanes. The long road has a sidewalk, barely any lights, and goes past a big open area with a horse farm, and one small waste facility. The waste facility was across the road from the horse field, and is up a slight incline. Between it and the road is a dip in the ground for rainwater to accumulate and run beneath the driveway, meaning if you drive off the road, you'd basically be going down a small half pipe right there. So I walked past the school, past the horse fields, and all the way down the long road to the 4-lane road, and I kept walking. It's now around 1 a.m. and the roads are empty, but they're totally illuminated by the streetlights, so I felt fine. At some point, this little car speeds down the road, way too close to the sidewalk, and I saw the brake lights come on as it kept driving pretty fast. Something about that car and how close it drove to the sidewalk gave me a major feeling of fear, and it made me feel like I just needed to get home. It wasn't a hey they came close to me fear, but it was a full body fear that I had to go. I didn't think this way at the time, but looking back at it, felt like someone was thinking, hey, they look young, should I go back? While holding their foot lightly on the brake pedal, just enough to slow down gradually. So I walked back for a good 30 to 45 minutes, and I was coming back up to the horse field on the dark road, which meant I just needed to make it past the wide open area before I was at the school, which basically meant I was home. The whole time I kept looking back and watching for cars or someone. But now I was feeling pretty safe because it had been so long and I was on the super dark road. Right before the horse field, there's this big front yard of this country house that's down the dirt road. The front yard had a fence, but it was just a post with 3 planks going across it, which meant any person could easily slide between the planks if they angled themselves right. I was getting to the end of the yard when the car speeds by me again, and I swear it's the same exact shape of the car that passed me before, and I got the same feeling of fear. It was way too dark to get the color, but the shape was unmistakable. I see the brake lights light up, and this time, they slowed down drastically before whipping the car around the side of the road and going to the dip at the waste facility. They drove down the incline to circle around and drive back out to the road like a madman in a span of 3 to 4 seconds. No one in their right mind would have used that dip to turn around, even slowly, and whipping the car around that way was abnormal. I swear I was stressing so hard that I was nearly frozen watching them do that, because I knew it was the same car and something bad was definitely going to happen to me. Right at the corner of the front yard by this field, there's a big oak tree growing a bit more than one teenage boy's width away from the fence for the yard. Perfect. The bottom plank for the fence was just barely above the ground, maybe a few inches up the post is all, so it was enough for me to hide if I laid up against it. The moment I saw the car headlights turn around and drive towards me, my first instinct was just to dive into the spot between the tree and the plank. I fit perfectly, and managed to get into the place before they had fully turned around. I put the hood over the back of my head and laid there. I fucking heard their brakes sliding as they drove past the yard, and then I heard them speed up and drive away a second later. I didn't look. I kept my head down and was breathing as heavy as possible so that I wouldn't have a full-on panic attack. I got up, looked back, and made sure there was no silhouettes of the car and no lights. Then I just booked it down the road to the school. I never went out that late alone again. That was my lesson learned. Trust your gut and always try to find a way to protect yourself if need be. Often, I enjoy walking my dog at nighttime. This is due to the fact that my dog is harder to walk when people are around with their own dogs. So we tend to walk around parks in the area when they become somewhat secluded. I'm not a very big guy. I'm just 5'10" and very lanky, and I wouldn't call myself an intimidating figure. However, my 120-pound black boxer lab named Loki could be somewhat considered threatening to most from what I hear. I figured his size would be used as a deterrent for anyone looking to cause nightly troubles. I was dead wrong. On one specific night in the fall of 2016, I can recall an encounter that reminds me of why I'm so reluctant to walk around once daylight falls. This park is one I've been to a couple times, and from what I remember, this park is usually empty around 6:30 and later on. Aside from a couple joggers and a few other dog walkers, not many people walk the same path I take. I also like to put my headphones on and listen to music while I walk. But on this night, I chose not to wear them since my phone was on low battery, and I wanted to preserve it as long as I could. Anyway, the walk was going as usual. Loki did some of his business, and we continued down our usual path. At about midway on our walk, I realized that it had started getting really dark. Since he was done with his business, I decided to cut the walk somewhat short, and we took a shortcut that kind of led us off the path. This path had a bunch of trees surrounding the area, and there were still leaves on the branches. With that being said, I felt a weird feeling as if I was being watched. I have pretty bad anxiety sometimes, but since I knew this town was safe, I knew nothing was going to happen. Still, I couldn't for the life of me shake off this feeling of being watched. I peered back to see if anyone had been following me out of anxiety, and every single time no one was there. In fact, no one was anywhere. This whole shortcut was essentially secluded. Suddenly, Loki stopped walking and also looked back. I told him, "Come on boy, we've got to go." One thing that I failed to mention is that he's a big coward. I noticed his tail was tucked between his legs, which is a telltale sign that a dog is afraid. I was also curious, but a bit nervous, but I surely did not want to find out what he heard or noticed. I wanted to get out of there ASAP. I pulled a little, and he began to walk, but every now and then I'd see him peer back. After maybe minutes or so of walking, he stopped again, and this time began to growl. Despite being a coward, Loki is a bark but no bite kind of dog, so I took the chance to see exactly what he was growling at. It was quite dark, so I couldn't see well, so I used my phone's flashlight to see what's up. Trees. Just trees. What he heard was probably some kind of small animal. Once again, I turned around and kept walking. He still continued to peer back once in a while, but this time I noticed it was a lot more frequent. I just said to myself, just squirrels? Maybe a bird? And I ignored it. Then I heard what appeared to be actual footsteps and twigs breaking. There is absolutely no way a small animal could produce a sound like that. Loki turned around quick, and still with his tail tucked between his legs, began to growl and bark. A figure that I can only describe as a man in his early 50s, possibly late 40s, appeared out of the woods. He was dressed in dirty clothes, his hair was long and was graying. He had one hand in his pocket and said to me, "Nice dog you have there, kid. What breed is he?" "He's a boxer lab." "Oh, I love dogs. Mind if I pet him?" The man got closer as he emerged from the trees. As he got closer, I realized he was quite a tall man and a bit burly. Loki instantly got bad vibes. He ran behind me and started to bark at him. Actually, I kinda do mind. My dog doesn't like strangers, so it's probably not the best if you pet him. "It's okay. He seems like a friendly guy. Just a little pet won't harm him," the man retorted as he got closer. I felt extremely uncomfortable as he got closer and closer. I don't know why this guy couldn't take no for an answer. I mean, I usually don't allow people to pet him unless he comes up to them first. If he's scared of you, then I usually don't want him to freak out by letting him be pet by a stranger. This is especially the case when the stranger comes out of the woods behind a few trees. I'm really sorry, man. I'm scared that he might bite you or something, I told him as I started to walk away. Like I said before, I wasn't trying to be judgmental or anything, but this dude came from the woods and was possibly trailing us from before. I don't know why you won't let me introduce myself to him, the guy replied angrily. This time I began to speed walk. I was very uncomfortable and my fight or flight instincts began to take over. He followed us and kept muttering curses to himself. I don't know if this man was under the influence of something, but he did not let up. I won't lie, I started to get a little angry. Why can't this guy just take no for an answer? He began to match my speed, almost as if he was trying to catch up to us. Loki and I both took this as a sign to start sprinting a bit. I don't remember much of the running, it was all a blur to me. I do remember the spine-tingling feeling of hearing his footsteps rapidly increasing behind me. For a man of his stature, he was quite fast. I also realized that his intentions weren't to pet my dog. No one reasonable would go that far just to pet a dog that clearly wanted nothing to do with him. I looked behind me and he was still in pursuit, maybe about 10 feet behind me, chasing us. I'll never forget the look in his eyes. I've never had anyone look at me like that. A look of killer intent. All for what? Just because he couldn't pet my dog? My instincts told me that he definitely had sinister intent behind that. Finally, the path led to a park exit and onto a busier street. I lived about 10 minutes away from the park. I made sure no one was following me and even made sure to walk on the populated side. After what seemed like an eternity, we got home, but I knew for a fact that I was not going to get a minute of sleep. From my window in the porch, I watched all night with Loki just to see if he followed us home. I also made a police report with the help of my parents. After all, this guy was very suspicious, and who knows what his true intentions were. Had his target been someone that couldn't protect themselves or run away, what would he have done? I also often ask myself, what if I had worn my headphones and the sound of music had drowned out the footsteps behind me? Ever since, I haven't walked low-key in that park. I've also made it a habit of mine to walk him in livelier streets at night. If I could give anyone a piece of advice, even if you live in a relatively safe town, do not ever let your guard down. You never know what kind of person might be lurking in the shadows. I'm a 25-year-old female. A couple months ago, I had to take a lift. Normally it's uneventful, but I'm always on my guard and aware that this is a stranger nonetheless. The lift arrives, I get in. I get kind of weird vibes. I asked, "Is this Matt?" And he said yes. Description matches, etc. He kind of turns around and gives me a once over. He seems like an awkward type in his mid-20s, so I let it go. And then he looks forward again and begins the ride. And I notice a very creepy audiobook is playing. I think to myself how this is really bad social etiquette not to ask if I want to change it. I don't like scary anything, so I'm annoyed and a bit nervous, because the narration and words are very eerie. It's describing dying, feeling like you're in a black hole, sinking. Gore too. We continue down residentials, and I notice he's driving erratically. He'll slow down a whole bunch, almost like he's nodding off mid-drive, and I start internally freaking out. We're halfway into the ride, and he's purposely avoiding eye contact through the rearview mirror. He keeps looking around near his seat for things that aren't there. He seems nervous and jumpy, but also nodding off as if he's extremely tired or more likely on drugs. It's only a 12-minute drive at this point. I don't know the neighborhood, so I don't want to ask him just to drop me off there. So we proceed onto the freeway. The audiobook is still playing. I get a chance to see the title and Google it. It's some incredibly dark horror sci-fi film from the 1990s that I've never heard of. He continues to look for things that aren't there, avoiding eye contact, slowing down when he shouldn't. I really don't want him to drop me off now because we're passing by industrial areas, and I'm in a skirt, makeup, etc. It's sundown. It somehow seems safer to be in the car. I decide to just sit up more, keep an eye on the road since he obviously isn't, and clear my throat every couple of minutes to remind him, "Yo, I'm here, don't die or sleep or whatever on me." At one point, he gets off at the wrong exit. I don't know if it was on purpose and he had a weird plan, also industrial area, but I finally speak up and say, "That's not the exit," pretty firmly, and he straightens up, doesn't say anything, and eventually gets me to my destination safely. It wouldn't have been so creepy if not for the audiobook. I don't know why anyone in their right mind would play something like that in a lift while not talking to the passenger and being uber weird. The whole thing still gives me the willies, and I gave him a 1 star and hope he gets some help and never does that again. I used to work overnight and get off around 7 a.m. One Sunday morning, fresh from work and exhausted, I missed the connecting bus home and called an Uber to pick me up at the bus stop. At this point, it was already around 8. It was a warm summer day, the sun was bright in the sky. Normal amount of foot traffic in a generally safe neighborhood. The app tells me that someone will be picking me up. Location shows them about 2 blocks away. 5 minutes go by. No movement on their end. 10 minutes, no movement. I know sometimes drivers do this to collect a cancellation fee, but I was still feeling a little hopeful. 2 minutes go by and the car pulls up. I thought maybe the app was just lagging on her location. There's a man driving, tells me he's my Uber, and asks me for the address of where I'm going. I tell him it's in the app. He shows me the screen on his phone. It's on a rider app with no rides requested. He reaffirms that he's my Uber driver and asks me for the address, pushing open the passenger door for me. I'm so tired at this point that my brain is broken. I put one leg in the car and something feels off. I recheck my phone. I'm supposed to have a female driver. It still shows her as 2 blocks away. I tell him that he's not my ride. "Oh, you called a Lyft?" he says and drives off quickly. I shudder to think of what would have happened if I had gotten into that ride. I contact Uber customer support. They said that they were sorry that my ride never came, but didn't care about the rest of the incident, let alone the other questions it raised. Like, how did you know I called an Uber when I was standing there at a clearly marked bus stop, scrolling through Facebook on my phone? I used Lyft exclusively for months after that, and still check the driver's profile before I get within 3 feet of the ride. I drive Uber a couple hours a week to earn some extra cash, pay for my car insurance, etc. I'm not a big drinker, so it always works out well for me when I go out with my friends late at night. I get to go out and hang out for a bit and earn some extra cash on the return trips home. One thing to keep in mind is that the Uber app does not tell you where your expected destination of the trip is before you accept it. So if someone is requesting to be dropped off in an extremely sketchy area, you have no idea until you've already accepted the trip and the person is literally in your backseat of your car. Super shady, and in my opinion, it should be illegal for Uber to do that, but I digress. I was driving home in this exact scenario, and I had dropped off a couple people already, when I saw someone requested a ride about 5 minutes away. I decided I would pick up this guy and then head home. Unfortunately, the pickup location for this gentleman was in a not so nice part of town. When I pulled up, the guy was not waiting outside, which I was mildly annoyed about. But as I looked around this sketchy apartment complex, I figured I couldn't blame him for not wanting to stand out there, out in the open. Finally, after about 5 minutes and a late fee later, the guy finally comes out and hops in the back seat. He's an African American gentleman that looked to be near my age. "Where are you headed?" I asked. "Post office," he muttered back to me. This instantly made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Why would someone be going to the post office at 1 a.m.? To my knowledge, no one worked the night shift at a post office. I decided to not ask any questions and commenced the trip, which was about 10 minutes away. The post office was on the eastern part of the city and is situated in a rather desolate part of town. Absolutely nobody other than myself and this guy were still out, judging by the look of the street. Finally, I pull up to the drive of the post office, which was tucked away in an area located by what appeared to be a large abandoned factory, and I began to get worried. The entire complex was a large cement building with about a half a football field of a driveway to the factory next door. Even though only the moonlight was the sole source of light for me to see, I could make out the shape of 4 shady silhouettes at the end of the drive. It looked like they were just standing there waiting for the passenger in my car. "That it is," I said. "You can drop me off here," he responded, and got out of the car and began walking towards the 4 associates. I have no idea what he was doing that night, but I don't think he was mailing a letter. Another Uber experience. I was driving downtown. At this time, I got a call from a younger man near my age. I drove to the location and parked my car next to a dilapidated bridge. I didn't see anyone waiting for an Uber and waited a couple seconds until I received a phone call from this guy who ordered the Uber. He explained that it wasn't for him, but for his friends. I didn't like the sound of that, and something about the situation made me nervous. At times, I might be overly cautious, but I've learned to always trust my gut. "I don't see your friends," I told him. The guy started describing them to me. They were 2 shaggy-looking men with bushy beards, he said. I started scanning around the area, trying to determine if I could see anyone that matched that description, and didn't see anyone. Nervous, I took my car to the park and started pulling away from the curb, with the idea that it would be best to just leave. Suddenly, as I was driving away, I saw the movement out of the corner of my eye. 2 hobos with long beards and ripped clothing emerged from under the bridge and walked towards my car. I instantly booked it and canceled the ride. I realized that it was probably just some guy trying to help out a couple homeless people to get where they needed to go, but the situation absolutely seemed off to me, and I have no idea if the guys were on drugs, etc. I don't regret canceling that ride at all. Not the creepiest experiences as far as some of the ones I've read on the sub, but 2 times that something seemed a tad off to me. This happened about 10 years ago when I was on summer break, 15 years old. I grew up in a very run-of-the-mill middle-class neighborhood in San Antonio. Our house sat on the corner, and the fence around the backyard had horizontal wood beams that almost made an X, as opposed to the vertical fence posts that I am more familiar with. Because of this, there were large gaps between the beams, and seeing through was fairly easy. Another detail worth noting, our back gate on the side of the house, near the road, had been wide open many mornings. And because of this, my dad had looped some wire through the latch and twisted it like a bread tie to keep it engaged, and closed it, but we would still find it open. In the backyard, there is a large deck and an above-ground pool that the deck was built up on to one of the ends. A huge, beautiful oak tree shaded the deck and part of the pool closest to the house. So my sister and I would have to anchor our feet at the furthest edge, closest to the back corner of the fence, and sunbathe on our floats. This happened on a Sunday. My grandfather was visiting and my parents were inside napping. My older sister had gone to a different pool with her friends, and I decided to float in our backyard. My mom closes the blinds to the back and locks the back door before laying down on the couch to snooze. I am in the pool for 20 minutes, and I can see that someone's standing on the other side of the fence looking in, but the sun is shining in my face so I can't see him well. I find it weird, but don't say anything. I see him walk off and don't think too much of it. Minutes pass, and I decide to swim around a bit to cool off and get back on the float. This time my stomach and my face are looking up towards the house instead of towards the fence. It feels like just a minute passes, and I hear the sound of wood creaking. I turn around, and this man is halfway over the back fence, about 15 feet away from me once he hits the ground. Part of me was in shock, and I froze for a moment, before the sheer terror and panic took over. This is not a dream, this is actually happening, and I need to get inside now. I felt as though the pool became Olympic-sized, and I could not get to the edge to climb out fast enough. By the time I make it out of the pool and start running to the back door, the man has made his way around the pool and is coming up the deck towards me. He was maybe in his late 20s, early 30s, pretty thin and around my height, 5'9". He walked the entire time and never spoke. I get to the door and it's locked. I start screaming, let me in, and pounding on the door. At least my mom was right there to unlock it, but 30 seconds felt like 10 minutes. And when my mom opened the door, he was just standing right behind me with a blank look in his eyes. I'm crying, my grandpa is freaking out. The man is still standing there, looking inside. My dad comes downstairs and goes crazy, screaming at the man and pushed him and told him to get the fuck out. My mom's on the phone with the police at this point, and the next moment makes the whole thing 10 times creepier. The man gets up and walks around the house over to the back gate, which had the wire latch, untwisted it and pushed through, and leaves the gate wide open and walks back across the street into our neighbor's house. The police arrive, and it turns out this man had been staying with his sister for the past 8 weeks and was on parole, recently released from jail, theft and assault charges. He had also broken into a different neighbor's home and stolen some china and some of their family photos. He went back to jail, and we never found that back gate left open again. It still gives me chills thinking about this, because my sister and I both had our bedrooms downstairs with our windows facing the backyard, and I just know he was coming there and watching us at night. My parents moved out of this home a few years later when I went to college, but I slept upstairs on a pulled-out couch for months after this, and will never live on the ground floor again if I can help it. This happened in 2008 when I was 9 years old. I lived in a townhome community where each road had 2 sides of homes. In between the backs of the houses, there was a back road with alleyways that went in between each building section. I lived on the edge of one of these, and my townhome was on one of the alleyways. I lived on one street, and across the back road on the opposite side lived an elderly woman whose name I didn't even know. I'm not sure what her situation was, but for whatever reason, she never really liked me. She was creepy and spray painted all over her windows so no one could see in her house. However, that never stopped her from sometimes staring out her bedroom window directly at mine and keeping it open at night to shine a red strobe light into my room across the way. She used to yell how she hated us. I was in 4th grade, and on a particular January morning, I unfortunately missed the bus. My dad sent me outside to get in the car so he could drive me, and he said that he would follow me out soon after. As I was walking to my dad's car, she came out of the alleyway next to my house, slowly, with a gigantic kitchen knife behind her back. She raised it and started running after me. I was faster than her, so I was able to avoid her, and was able to get back into the house. She walked and stood on the neighbor's porch across the way and stared at my house. I was terrified. My dad ran out and yelled at her, and she said she wanted us to get rid of us stupid kids. My parents called the police. The police sent her home, and they had an ambulance pick her up later. My parents went on some sort of court meeting about it, but I don't really know the details. I didn't see her again after that until 1 year later. I don't remember the day, but it snowed that morning, so I was going to run out the front door and play in the snow. I opened the door to see her standing on my porch, but looking towards the road. I panicked, closed, and locked the door. I ran up to my parents' room and told them what happened, and we saw her walk off the porch up the street. I never saw her again after that. My family has since moved away from there, but people I know still live there, and her windows are still the same spray-painted windows. Though it doesn't affect me as much as it used to, I still don't like being around sharp knives. I'm not quite sure where to begin, but I'll start by giving some background information. I'm now a 25-year-old female, but when I first moved into my apartment, I was only 21 or 22 at the time. The apartment complex I lived in was very quiet for the most part. A lot of younger families and old people lived there. It was also in a golf course community in my hometown, smallish town with moderate crime rates. When I moved in, I didn't know the neighbors to the left of me, but about 2 years into my lease, a middle-aged couple moved in. I never got their names, but somehow the neighbor knew mine, which wasn't too odd because old people there are super chatty, and I'm sure in passing they learned my name. I'm a very intuitive person and can usually pick up cues when someone isn't a good person. My first few encounters with the husband, I immediately got weird vibes from him. In hindsight, he didn't do anything out of the normal at first. It was just a gut feeling I had. Whenever he was with his wife and I tried to talk to him, really just to pet their dog, whenever I saw them walking her, the husband would cut the wife off and talk for her. Weird, but okay. Well, after a year of my boyfriend moving in with me, he fell off a golf cart on Christmas Eve and suffered from a traumatic brain injury. He wasn't allowed to drive for 6 months, so I was responsible for taking him to and from work during those 6 months. He was a workaholic and worked late most of the time, so I was alone in the house until 10 or 11 most nights. Somehow or another, this creepy neighbor next to me finds out, probably from the neighbors, that my boyfriend had a traumatic brain injury and wasn't driving. This guy knew I was home most nights alone and decided to purposely do things to fuck with me. The one instance that sent chills up my spine and still really sticks out in my memory and makes me thankful I moved out of those apartments into a house in the country 20 miles away. So one night, I get home from the store or hanging out with a friend, and like always, I sat in my car in the parking lot on my phone. Doors locked, of course, because I'm paranoid. After about 10 minutes, as I'm going to turn off the car and go inside, I look to my right and see my neighbor standing in the breezeway of the building directly across from ours. It's maybe 9 p.m. by now, so I just assume he's walking his dog or taking the trash out. I resume to playing on my phone and decide to look up once more. He hasn't moved. He's standing in the breezeway with a light behind him, so I can just see his silhouette, but I know for a fact it's him. I was taught to stare back at a person who's making you feel uncomfortable, so they either break eye contact or speak up about why they're staring at you. So I'm staring back, and he just backs up further in the breezeway, out of my sight. I'm slightly creeped out at this point, but decide right then that I wasn't getting out of my car and not going inside until my boyfriend called me to pick him up from work. I turn my phone's brightness down to hopefully give him less clear view of me sitting in my car in the dark. Not even 5 minutes later, he's walking from the far side of the complex, complete opposite side of our building. He's not walking his dog, he's got no garbage, so I can assume he didn't take the trash out to the dumpster. He walks on the sidewalk right in front of my car, stops and stares straight into my soul while pointing his index finger and middle finger, kind of like the peace sign but in a pointing motion. He finally continues on his walk. He walks to his work van, parked 2 or 3 spots to my left. There are no cars between mine and his. He grabs some empty grocery bags out of his car, taking a suspiciously long time to grab them. He proceeds to walk back in the direction he came from. He stops in front of my car again, stares at me for a second, and continues on. There's a sidewalk perpendicular to the one that he's on, and at the end of the sidewalk, there's another that's parallel to the one he's currently on. From an aerial view, it's in the shape of an uppercase H. Our building is on the left. The one he was standing at earlier, when I spotted him, was on the right. He stopped maybe 5 more times between my car and our apartment building, turning back to face me every time he stops. This sent chills down my spine, and I immediately text my boyfriend to let him know the weird neighbor was being a creep, and I felt like he was purposely trying to scare me. I go to pick up my boyfriend. We arrive back home on edge from this creep. My boyfriend leaves something in the car, so as I'm approaching our front door to unlock it, he jogs back to the car, and lo and behold, my creepy ass neighbor is walking up to me. He says, "Hello, Amber." Again, I've never introduced myself with my name. I'm guessing another neighbor had said it in passing, but it still freaked me out after the interaction while I was sitting in my car. There's a half dozen other things that this guy has done before and after that night that gave me the creeps. My boyfriend walked with me to the dumpster and the on-site laundromat because he too was creeped out. He's much more naive than I am, by default, but he's not too naive to write this off as an innocent run-in with a neighbor. As I'm writing this, I feel I can't even paint a picture of how creepy it really was. Maybe I'm overreacting, but my gut at the time is telling me that something was off. I lived in a multi-high-rise apartment complex near Miami, Florida, during college around 2004 to 2006. I'm female, was 18 to 20 at the time. My first time living on my own in a city away from my family. These two things happened and still creep me out to this day. The first one, I lived on the 14th floor in an open concept studio apartment that had a small balcony with a sliding glass door that would look into my living room, bed space, with a galley kitchen, bathroom in the background, and then a very small hallway leading to my front door in between them and connecting the entire space. Two girls my age moved into the studio next to me. They seemed off, wore sunglasses always, never said hi when I said hi, and just gave me an off vibe. After a couple months, I noticed the two girls were gone. To my knowledge, they didn't move out, but three men around their 30s started going in and out of the apartment a lot. They also gave off very creepy vibes, always staring in the hallway, but not speaking, just weird. Often I would be up all night watching Sex and the City DVDs I rented from Blockbuster while I sat on the couch working on projects for school. I would sometimes leave the vertical blinds slightly turned to allow some light and just to see the skyline while working. One week, my mom came to visit me and I was in the kitchen, which has one of those open cutouts in the wall so you can see into the living space and the balcony. She said to me, "I swear I just saw someone on your balcony," and then jumped back over. I forgot to add, my balcony and the weirdos next to me have connected balconies with a small sort of gate in between. Me being a kid and just stressed out about school was like, whatever, it's probably nothing, and moved on. My mom ended up getting a piece of wood to put in the door frame so no one could open it from outside. It also had a lock as well. About 2 months after that, my mom and grandmother came to visit a couple days and decided one night to go to a casino nearby. It's about 10 or 11 at night. I don't go because I'm working on a project for school. About 15 minutes after they leave, I hear rustling by my front door. I slowly move to check the peephole as inconspicuously as possible, and I see one of the creeps next to the door, off to the side of my door, using his right arm to hold himself up on my door frame while looking downward. My heart drops, and I remember my face getting really flushed with anxiety, like hot. As I'm standing there thinking where my phone is at, what should I do? I start to hear the sliding glass door behind me move. It was locked, but slightly moved back and forth. As I said, I keep my blinds slightly open, but in a way where I can see the person, but they mostly can't see me. It was the other guy from the same apartment. At this point, it doesn't take much to assume that they're at least trying to scare me, and at most, wanting to harm me. And they knew that my family had left. My phone was on the couch, and I'm too scared to move towards the sliding glass door and have the person see me get my phone. As I'm standing there, all of a sudden, sheets of white computer paper start being flung under my door into my apartment hallway. Literally blank sheets of paper, and the door handle starts to go up and down. At this point, I'm in fight or flight, and I can't fight, so I'm just waiting for the guy at the door to kick it in. My only thought was to grab a large carving knife my mom gave me for protection in situations like this. I ducked down to get it from the drawer and hide just around the corner in the kitchen. I aimed the knife in my hand at the same height where I assumed the jugular would be at, and all I knew was as soon as the door would be kicked open, I would count to 2, then start stabbing. I could still feel the tightness in my chest, and now I was breathing so fast and heavy, I thought I was gonna black out. Next thing I hear is the elevator, which was right next to my apartment on the other side. It opens and I hear my mom and grandmother talking, and then I hear the key start to go into the door and my mom opens it. She screams because I'm standing there terrified with a knife in my hand, ready to stab her. Luckily, my mom and grandmother had only made it to Dairy Queen across the building, got dipped cones, and then said fuck it and came back home, which is kind of funny in itself. We called the complex security. They didn't give a shit. And then I called Miami PD. They took a basic report and didn't do shit either. Didn't even go to the next door to see what's up. Then later in the week I saw the maintenance workers taking out furniture and appliances. Like the dudes just vanished. I never saw them again, and a couple with a new baby moved in. Truly one of the scariest situations I've ever been in, and I feel that if my family wouldn't have come back early, something horrible would have happened. The second scary encounter. Again, still in college. I would stay late at the labs and such as it got near finals time. So often I would have to go park behind the building, but in front of the other building in my complex. As mentioned, this was a large high-rise complex with multiple buildings and large parking lots in between. Each building has its front and back entrance with a kind of drive-up concrete built into the building awning. Above the awning thing is a center window where the elevator hallway is. So if you felt inclined, you could jump out the window and walk around this awning. I park in the back of my apartment. About halfway to the other building, I see plain as day a gorilla suit, like full size, full formed, hairs and pecs. I stare at it for a moment and nope out of there. I watch a lot of horror movies, and well, this is the beginning of one. It's weird, but I just think someone is playing a prank. Over the next few weeks, it's sometimes there and sometimes not. The guy I was dating at the time saw it too and just kind of laughed at it and thought it was creepy and weird. One night, I get home around 2 a.m. No parking in the front, so I head to the back. The gorilla is there. That night felt off. I just felt uneasy and something seemed different about it. I attempted to park as close as I could to the back entrance. The parking lots are overpacked and always full, so not easy to do. I get out of my car and, as said, something just freaked me out more tonight about this gorilla suit. I have to get my supplies out of the back seat, and I'm trying to keep checking on the gorilla as I'm getting my stuff. And this 100% happened, God is my witness. This motherfucker starts walking and jumps off the damn awning and literally doesn't miss a beat and starts booking it straight towards me. I was in shock. I stood there for a beat or two, thinking what the fuck, and then just started running full blast to my back door. I didn't even turn around, I just ran. I got into the lobby and start slamming the elevator button. I can't see anything, no one's around. I'm starting to panic, cry, freak out. Finally, the elevator opens, and like a movie, I get inside and hit the door close button like 50 times. And that's it. I get into my apartment. Nothing happened. Did not see that gorilla again. Needless to say, I moved out after this. Weirdest apartment I've ever lived in. When I was 26, I got an apartment on the first floor with my 2-year-old daughter because I was getting a divorce from her dad. There was this guy that would always see me walking into my apartment building that would yell out his window, "Hey beautiful, how you doing?" Like at least a few times a week. I didn't like to bring my daughter with me to the laundry room, so I waited until she was over at her dad's or a family member's to do laundry. The laundry room was in a different section of the building, so I had to walk outside from my part of the building to the next. I was holding my basket when this guy saw me and yelled, "Hey beautiful." I said hi and prayed to God that he would not follow me, knowing that the laundry room was typically empty and I didn't want to be alone with him. Sure enough, he followed me. I started putting my clothes in the washer as fast as I could when he entered the laundry room. You have to open the door with a key, so it was clear that he did in fact live in the complex. He did not have any laundry with him. He said to me, "Hey beautiful, you look nice today." I thanked him and continued to promptly throw my clothes into the washer. He started rambling on, making half-assed small talk. I can't even remember what exactly. I was just kind of scared because it was just so strange that he followed me into an empty room. He finally says to me, "So what apartment do you live in?" I was kind of shocked that he would ask a question like that. Did he think I was stupid enough to tell him my apartment number? I just said, "Over there," and pointed because I knew he already knew which building I was coming out of, since he sees me every day. Then the dude had the nerve to ask, "Yeah, but which one?" I said, "I don't know." And then I suppose it was my lucky day because someone walked into the laundry room and the guy told me that he would see me around and took off. I always made sure I had a friend come with me to do the laundry after that. This could have been nothing, but if so, he should know better than to follow a woman into an empty room to talk to her and ask her personal questions. So 2 years ago, we had to leave our house for a while and moved into very cheap houses in the middle of nowhere. They were more like some stationary trailers in the middle of nowhere, nothing but fields and fields. We had a handful of neighbors who lived in the same kind of houses around us, and there was one actual house. However, it was super run down and old, so I always thought no one lived there. One morning I walked our dog quite early, so no one was out yet and the fields were empty. On my way back home, suddenly I see a man coming out of the house, which I thought was abandoned. He had a push cart that was full of branches, leaves, etc. So I assumed that he was just doing some gardening work. I never saw him before. His clothes looked just as run down as the house itself, and I just wanted to quickly walk past him. I gave him a friendly smile and just waited for him to say good morning. When he finally stopped and widened his eyes as if he was shocked to see me, he just stood there, staring at me with his pushcart and started to grab something in the cart without breaking eye contact with me. He pulled out a garden machete. He held it above his head in a clearly threatening manner while staring at me and not saying a single word. My heart skipped a bit and I walked quickly past him, ducking, in case he was to throw it at me because it totally looked like he wanted to, and to also show him that I'm no threat. He followed me with his body by turning it in my direction. Luckily he didn't move other than that, and as soon as I was past him, I just ran for it. I never saw him again, but I also never went near that house again, and luckily a few weeks later we moved away. I'm just glad my dog didn't really pay attention to him and didn't start barking, because I'm pretty sure that would have made him snap. So a little backstory. This happened around a year ago. Back then I used to walk around my neighborhood at sunset to help with my anxiety and calm me down. Of course I had random people shouting at me, but these two encounters are what really stuck with me. The first one, I turned the street and saw a truck driving slowly on my left-hand side. I got a really bad feeling, which I brushed off as me being overly anxious. I still crossed the street, however, just to be safe. The truck pulls up next to me on the opposite side, and the driver parks. Not in a parking space or anything, but in the middle of the street. He rolls down his window and just stares at me. It really freaked me out and I got the chills, so I walked as fast as I could. But so that he wouldn't think I was scared or anything. One of the people on the street were watering their flowers, so I came up to her and just started talking to her about random things about flowers, my favorite flowers, asking how hers were doing. Dude eventually drove off and I ran home, but carefully made sure that he wasn't still there or waiting or anything. The second one, I was walking down the street when a random woman, in her late 30s, early 40s, asked me if I was thirsty and told me to come inside for water. I said no, I was okay, and she left me alone. Later on I sat down on the curb since I was tired of walking, and the same lady drives up to me, stops, and asks if I'm okay. It scared me a little, but I took it as her just wanting to make sure I was okay. So I just told her that I was taking a break and sending my mom some photos. She nods and drives off. When I make it to my house, again the woman drives up to me and asks me what I'm doing, if I'm okay, and to get inside her car so she could help. This really freaked me out, and I have no idea how this woman keeps finding out where I am, why she's everywhere I'm going, and why she keeps insisting I go with her. I'm really scared now, so I told her that my neighbor asked me to check on her dog. This was my house, but I didn't want her to know that. She asked me again if I'm sure, and that if I go into her house, she'll help me. I tell her that I'm thankful for her concern, but I'm completely fine and I don't need any help, and then I walk inside my house. The woman drove off, and I've never seen her since. When I was about 20, I moved out of home into a shared house with about 5 other flatmates. Generally, at any given time, there were 6 people living in this 5-bedroom house. One of the rooms had 2 beds. During my 10-month stay, I probably had about 25 different flatmates due to the high turnover. Some were travelers backpacking around Australia, and others would only stay for a few weeks before moving on. I had a good friend in there, around the same age as me. I'll call her Jenny, who moved in shortly after I did. We were always joking about how many colorful characters that we encountered during our stay. Jenny and I both had the largest rooms in the house that were near the front, and in between our rooms was a tiny space us flatmates used to call the broom closet. It was big enough for a bunk bed, and that was about it. Whoever stayed in there would store their stuff under the bunk. One day, shortly after the broom closet had become vacant again, a Brazilian guy named Marcel, who I think was about 38 years old, rocked up and moved in. He seemed fun enough at first. He was always stoned and in a good mood, and always sharing his clones with everyone. He always had a big bong with him, and would laugh and say, "Hee hee, hey, we smoke bong, eh?" Our house was a bit of a party house, with drinking and smoking being pretty common here. Over the next several weeks, Marcel's attitude changed from being a happy-go-lucky guy to increasingly paranoid and angry. I remember him breaking down crying one night and kept saying, "The children are dying, the children are dying," and I didn't know how to help him. Another time, he lashed out at all of us and said that the house was full of unashamed homosexuals. Myself and one of the guys in the house at the time were gay. He would also say, "Women having free sex." Jenny sometimes brought her dates home and would take them to her room. I remember coming home one time and he was in his room with the door open, but I didn't want to look inside, so I hurried to my room. But on the way, I heard him making some strange grunting noises. It sounded almost animalistic. Eventually, his erratic behavior and mood swings got to the point where the rest of our flatmates spoke to the landlords, and they came to ask him to leave. He packed up his stuff, and when he was leaving, he pointed to us and said that God would judge us all one day. After he had gone, Jenny and I went to check out the broom closet, as we'd never seen it while it was empty. I noticed next to the bunk, where someone would lay their head to go to sleep, there was a small hole in the wall. It was just big enough that when you put your eye near it, you could see Jenny's entire room, and it overlooked her bed. Next to the hole was a faint but grubby-looking man's handprint. There were also stains further down the wall, towards the end of the bed. Jenny was horrified when she realized Marcel had been watching her in her bedroom all this time, and also appeared to be masturbating. I was disgusted as well. It was truly disturbing. We were pretty sure that he must have created the hole himself, as before he moved in, a young girl stayed in that room, and she never mentioned it. We both moved out shortly after that, but during our time in that house, I would say that that was definitely the creepiest encounter we had while living there. I'm a 13-year-old female. I live in the apartment building with my 40-year-old mom. My mom is married but separated. Before she separated from her husband, we lived in a small apartment down the street, and we had a neighbor who all named Michael. Michael would constantly make my mom feel uncomfortable. For example, when my mom would get home and do the laundry, she would put on her lazy bra. He would happen to always be in the laundry room. He was always talking to her and nudging her, as some people do when they make jokes and talking. But he was constantly nudging her around her top area, which made her feel uncomfortable. So fast forward 5 years, they separate, and we move down the street. Come to find out, he lives right next to us. When my mom would leave out of our apartment, so would he by pretending to get the mail. The first couple times it seemed like a coincidence, but it just kept happening. So about 2 weeks ago, we were going somewhere and my mom had to pick me up from home. She had to go inside for a moment and I was ready to go. I was waiting in the car sitting on the driver's side with my cousin. He pulls up and is staring at me, so I make sure the doors are locked. He gets out and I see him in the mirrors, walking up to his car. I ignored him, but then he knocks on my window. He started talking, but I don't know what he was saying because I didn't have the windows rolled down. I was so scared and I stayed on my phone until my mom came out. I haven't seen him since, but I keep my pocket knife on me whenever I'm alone. I haven't even thought about this encounter in years. When I was 17, I was in the apartment complex clubhouse in the computer room doing homework. A man who's probably in his mid-30s came in and sat next to me and was doing something on his computer. He struck up a convo with me by complimenting my outfit, and I just thought he was being nice. But he then started asking about my life story, and naive little me told him everything he asked about. He asked where I went to school, what clubs I was involved with, etc. Stuff that seemed harmless at first. I just thought he was being chatty. Everything seemed fine until he asked me, "So do you live here alone?" And alarm bells went off in my head. I told him no, I live with my family. Which is true, I was only 17 and in high school. But that wasn't the point. I thought it was weird that he asked me that. My gut told me to leave, so I told him that I was done with my homework and left. I made sure he didn't follow me. He couldn't have been some rando off the streets who walked in, because it was a gated community, and also you needed a key to get into the clubhouse. I assume he lived there. I never saw him since. So back in 2019, I remember there being a big uproar of unknown creatures roaming the forest, like Bigfoot and skinwalkers. But this story isn't about them. This story is probably one of the scariest things I think I ever heard about. The Wendigo. A few months ago, after one of my friends, Jacob, mentioned the big uproar, I went to go see him, since I've always been enlisted in the US Marines. I got back after being discharged, and one of the first things I did was go see him. We're having a good time, and he brought up the idea of going out and hanging out at the spot his ex-girlfriend took him when they wanted to get away for a few hours. So I decided why not, so I grabbed my gun and we went out to the extremely secluded area and started messing around on the old docks that was there. It had been pretty much forgotten by the looks of it, poorly maintained, and some of the boards were just completely rotted through. So about 30 minutes into our shenanigans, and Jacob brings up the topic of the Wendigo. The name sounded a little scary, even for me. Curious, I asked him about it. He said if you went into the woods and said Wendigo 3 times, you would come across the scariest thing you've ever seen. Me calling his bluff, I told him to prove it. To this day, I wish I hadn't. We start walking on this little path that led deep into the thick of the woods, close to the Alabama state line. We walked for maybe 20-ish minutes and decided we were in a good spot. I feel it's worth knowing that it had been raining a lot over the last couple days, so the ground was completely saturated with water. I turned to Jacob and he dares me to do it. I stood there in complete silence. The rest of the forest was almost silent as well, besides the tall pines swaying in the wind above our heads. Reluctantly, I started to say it. Wendigo, Wendigo, Wendigo. Then, nothing happened. I let out a silent sigh of relief at the fact that nothing happened. One thing about mine and Jacob's friendship is we loved it when one of us would prove the other one wrong about something. In our friendship for 10 years, I think this was one of the first times I had proven him wrong at anything. We started talking a bit of shit back and forth when we heard a noise in the distance. Me still having the reflexes I had from the Marines, I immediately snapped towards the direction of the noise. They were just then turning into noises. I started to move closer to the noises, and shortly after, we saw a few coyotes running across a path about 30 feet in front of us. I breathed a sigh of relief, but the relief didn't last long. I knew something was up. I didn't know what it was at first, but I just knew that it was time for me and Jacob to leave. As we turned to leave the woods, all of a sudden, a pine tree started to groan and creak as it started to come down. Noticing this in a moment of pure instinct, I shoved Jacob forward and the tree came falling through the rest of the branches and landed right between us. Jake let out a cry of terror as the tree landed, and I hopped over the tree to get him. I could feel his heart pounding like a drum as I grabbed him by his shirt and yanked him to his feet. He was still terrified and practically crying as I screamed at him on top of my lungs. "Move, Jacob! Fucking move now!" I spun him around really hard, causing him to fall to his knees. I quickly got him up, and we both started to sprint down the path back in the direction we came from. I didn't dare look back, and neither did Jacob. I was sprinting through the woods when a familiar sound came from behind me. Jacob, come quick!" It was the sound of Jacob's younger sister, Olivia. He turned to try to get past me. The whole time he was screaming, "Olivia!" I stopped him and said, "Jacob, look at me. It's not her. Do you hear me? It's not her." Just then, another pine tree started to buckle. I saw it just in time and tackled Jacob down to the ground, and both of us were nearly crushed. I screamed at Jacob once more. "Go! Get out of here! Go now!" As I was screaming that, I pulled my gun out of my waistband and aimed it down the trail the direction of where we came from. Jake made it to the opening of the trail and turned back and noticed I was still aiming my gun down the trail. "Bradley, get out of there! Come on, hurry!" I turned and started sprinting towards him. As I made it into the clearing a good 50 feet, I turned and me and Jacob both saw it. The thing we had ushered into showing itself, the Wendigo. It stood about 9 feet tall on its hind legs. There's practically no meat on the bones. It had really skinny legs and skinnier arms. Its skin a pale white, almost like vampires. The thing I noticed most about it was its eyes, a vibrant blue, almost like a lightsaber blue, for those who have seen Star Wars. Having had enough fear, I raised my gun and fired it at the Wendigo. Jacob, not sticking around to see if I killed it, ran towards the car. I turned and did the same thing as he passed me. That was my first experience with the so-called Wendigo, and I pray almost every night that I never encounter something that terrifying again. For reference, I live in a rural part of the eastern United States. At the same time every year, for 3 years, something interesting has been happening. It has to be on a warm summer night, and it has to be very dark, like pitch black dark. More importantly, I have to have my windows open. At around the same time every year, at night, I'll wake up to light footsteps in the distance from my window. And just footsteps. Nothing else makes a sound. No crickets chirping or anything. These will grow louder and closer until they eventually stop right outside my window. Then I feel like I'm being watched, like intensely watched by whatever is out there. It invokes some serious fear and is almost paralyzing. This fear prevents me from getting up and turning any lights on trying to look at whatever's out there, as something in my mind says, I don't want to see what's out there. I can still move though, and all 3 times this has happened, have cowered as far away from the window as I could, until I eventually fall asleep. I have no idea what it looks physically, and all I know is the footsteps and the fear, and the fact that it comes once a year. I've tried doing research on stuff like this, but nothing I find really relates. It could easily be a person doing this, but why at one certain time, and why every year? I hope some of you might have an idea of what it could be. To finish off my last year of high school, I had to go to a school which was located about 10 to 15 minutes away from the nearest town in Durango, Colorado. It was a boarding school, and I lived there with about 30 other students and teachers. When I first got there, I never heard of the term skinwalker until one of my classmates mentioned it. I got curious and looked it up. Google made it seem like skinwalker was just a meme, saying it's a magic transforming creature. So we would always say, watch out for the skinwalkers, and no one really took it seriously. The campus was huge, probably about 20 to 30 acres of land next to a river. About 2 weeks after I got there, I was walking around campus and I noticed an Indian burial ground about 75 feet away from the cabin. There was about 20 cabins at the whole place, and each could fit 2 people to live in it. One night, my roommate and I were up around midnight playing Call of Duty, and we started hearing sounds of a very large animal full force sprinting into the back of our cabin multiple times, and we were freaked the fuck out. Our school didn't allow guns, so we had no choice but to double lock the doors and close the shades. Even the night security came by because they thought that we were walking outside the cabin, causing havoc at midnight. He would come by every hour to check on everyone and make sure everything was fine. He was a cool guy though. He told us that he was convinced that we were outside, but after we told him what happened, and after he saw both of our faces were pale white, he sort of believed us. Weird shit like this continued to happen about once or twice a week after that for about 2 months. Whether it was random scratches we heard on the window, or a bunch of lights in the middle of the field that we could see in the distance through our windows, screams and whistles, etc. The people in the neighboring cabins and I would also talk about similar experiences, but stopped shortly after a native that went to the school told us that talking about skinwalkers attracts them. It was getting to the point where I had no choice but to tell someone. I decided to have a meeting with my principal and talk to him about it on behalf of everyone there. What he said freaked me out. He told me back in 2010 he was working late at school one night, and as he walked out of the office, he saw someone sprinting into the cafeteria, ripping papers off the wall as it ran by. He thought it was a student. He chased whatever it was into the cafeteria, which was one way in and one way out, only one door. As he got into the cafeteria, he turned the lights on. There was nobody there. My roommate dropped out of school about halfway through the year because of this, and I couldn't find anyone else to live in the cabin. So I was forced to listen to this shit alone for months on end. It was absolutely fucked. I was on the verge of dropping out, but I couldn't because I was close to finishing my senior year, about 3/4 of the way through. Our school had a quarterly thing where we would go on a week-long hiking trip somewhere around the country. There's 5 different groups, and my group was going to hike up Humphreys Peak in Arizona. We camped the whole way back to Colorado. It was about a 6-hour drive to the peak, and the hike took most of the day. The first night was not bad, and I wasn't thinking about skinwalker shit, as I hadn't been bothered by them for weeks at this point. The next day, we spent most of the time driving and hiking to the next camp spot, which is a random place in the middle of the desert. As we set up our hammocks and start to relax, an older woman in a bikini appears from behind a hill. It was very unsettling as we noticed she didn't have a water bottle, backpack, or anything 6 miles into the trail. She proceeds to start talking to one of the teachers and says that she knows this place very well and can show him around. They start walking and everyone couldn't help but notice her walk. It was like she broke both her knees and was limping, but not limping. I can't even describe how weird of a walk it was. A couple minutes go by and the teacher returns without her. He walks by everyone and goes straight into the tent. I didn't think too much of it, but thought her walk was kinda weird. Here's where things get fucked. Third day, we finally get to Tucker Flat after a long day of driving and another long hike into the desert. We end up on a giant rock and decide to camp there. We are in the dead middle of nowhere. It's getting dark, so we have fire, make food, and shortly after go to bed. Too bad I didn't sleep at all the whole night. I spent most of the night staring at the top of my tent, as from what happened from the night before, still thinking about that very creepy old lady. It was about 10 or 11 when we started hearing noises that sounded like rustling at first, and then those rustles turned to footsteps, and then back into small rustles again. As my roommate and I both hear it getting closer and closer to our tent, I whisper, "You hear that?" Nearly shitting myself, hoping that it wouldn't hear us. He didn't answer me, so I looked over at him, and he was staring at me, dead in the eyes, bugged out, with a knife in his hand. I grabbed mine too next to me and slowly put it to my chest. I knew what we had to do, but didn't know if I had the balls to. The footsteps finally stopped and I got a sense of relief and decided it was a perfect time to open the tent and check out what was making those noises. As I opened my side of the tent, I am greeted by a pair of eyes staring right back at me from less than a foot away. What was it? A black cat in the middle of the desert? At this point, there are only two scenarios going through my head. What the fuck and what the fuck? When my tent mate peeks his head and sees, his jaw drops. How the fuck is a cat into a hiking trail in the middle of the desert at 11 p.m.? We were stumped and decided walking back to the trailhead and getting to the van was our safest bet. So we ended up walking the whole 5 or 6 miles back at 11 p.m. and slept in the van. The whole time we heard rustling behind us, and whenever we used our flashlights, there were a pair of eyes looking at us from the distance. I ended up reading all sorts of information about skinwalkers, and a shiver went down my spine. I read that skinwalkers often turn into small dogs or cats to trick whoever they're messing with. This school was by far the most messed up place I had ever lived, and I thank God every day that I did not have to live there anymore. This is just one experience that I had, and it only got worse throughout the year. If you want to avoid all this shit happening to you, just don't say the word skinwalker. This is my first time going public about this encounter, out of fear of seeing it again. This took place roughly 14 years ago. When I was a kid, my family moved out of the city and moved to a small town called Deerbrook. It was situated on the outskirts of Antigo, Wisconsin. Our house was surrounded by woods on 3 sides and a river and field in the back. The first year was very calm and relaxing, other than the constant coyote howls at night. But every so often, there would be a different howl that would shake us to the core. It was much deeper and louder. At first, my parents dismissed it as a wolf or just a bigger coyote, but something about it just seemed off. One night in mid-July, my brother, my sister, and I decided to pitch a tent in the back field along the tree line. We just wanted to go camping, I guess. We sat there with our sticks roasting our marshmallows till it got really dark. Then the typical howl started up. Once again, that deeper howl was back, and it sounded like it was right in our ears. With how loud it was hard to even guess where it was coming from. So we decided to put our fire out and get in our tent. Later that night, my sister falls asleep, so my brother and I are just chatting and making jokes. Within minutes, we heard animals running around the tent, and then a little raccoon started to claw at the side of the tent that I was sleeping on. At first, I just kept poking at it, and then I heard something else, the crack of sticks from the tree. At this point, my brother thought it was a bear, and I told him to be quiet and woke my sister up. We started to hear footsteps coming closer and closer. Pretty quick, they were right next to me. The raccoon just bolted out of there, and then there was a strange odor coming from somewhere. It smelled like copper, sulfur, and wet dog. It was almost overpowering and made me want to puke. Then we hear our mom calling us, and when she shined the flashlight on us, it revealed the most unsettling thing I have ever seen. The shadow of this thing was shining through our tent, and it was massive. It had pointed ears that were tilted back like a dog on the prowl, and its hands were human-looking, with long fingers that ended in a point. The mouth was in the shape of a snout, just a little shorter, and it had a mid-sized tail. My mom started screaming, and whatever the thing was bolted back into the woods. We rushed inside with her mom and didn't go back out for a few days. Fast forward a few months, and I was in the living room with my mom while my sister was in the shower. We were watching Wheel of Fortune or something like that when my sister screamed bloody murder. My mom jumped up and went to go get her. She pulled her out of the bathroom, and I got curious to why she was freaking out, so I went to see. Above the shower there was a super small window that only a small head could fit through. In the window was a set of red glowing eyes staring down at me. We stared at each other for what felt like a decade. I didn't feel fear, more like curiosity, and I didn't feel like I was in danger at the time. My mom came in and pulled me out. The eyes turned away as well. The rest of the night was quiet after that. A few days later, my brother came back from my dad's. Him and I had bunk beds, and I always take the bottom bunk. That night was kind of gloomy. It wasn't real windy, but it was drizzling a little bit. Later that night, my brother and I got woken up to the window being opened. It was locked beforehand, by the way. After that, we closed it and went back to bed. It happened again and again, like 3 more times. Each time we locked it, but the final time was the worst. It flung open so hard that the glass shattered, and this time we saw what pushed it open. It had the same hands from the tent, but I could see it clearly now. It had matted black fur covering its arm. The skin and palms were a light tan, and the claws were about 5 to 6 inches long. At the bottom of the window I saw a face, or whatever it was showing. It was just the eyes, glowing bright red. They looked like embers from a fire. My brother and I bolted up and grabbed my sister and locked ourselves in the back of the gaming room. We stayed there for the rest of the night, and when my mom came home, we told her and packed our things. We moved out of the house in a day and took everything that would fit, filling one car in the U-Haul. My stepdad's truck was full as well, and we left, never to return. To this day, my family is still scared to talk about it, but if my brother has a few drinks, we discuss it. My mom just shuts down whenever it's brought up. Thank you for your time. For starters, this was 3 years ago. I was 12 years old and with my best friend from school named Jesse. We are both Métis and what used to be Algonquin land, and this was in January in northern Ontario. We were in a sand pit, just a big crater filled with sand, probably 30 feet deep and a couple hundred feet wide. We were a good 2 hours from his house, and we were eating MREs I had bought online, avid zombie apocalypse preppers. I was 12. But after eating, a storm brewed, colder than usual. It was around negative 33 degrees Celsius that day, with a piercing wind. Our good gear was at the house for the cold. On our way out, we found ourselves with a problem, or something we were not ready for. We heard a screech and assumed it might have been a wolverine, so we ran, and after a long run, we finally hit a service road. After stopping for a breath and realizing we might not make it, as we were starting to feel warm, which are symptoms of severe frostbite, and we had over an hour to go. Then we saw an animal on its hind legs, but a black-gray color, and maybe 13 feet. We saw the bones pushing through the skin. We stood still. I know for a fact that this was no hallucination, and we had the same exact image of it, despite not talking about details. It gave off the feeling of dread and hopelessness. I realized I might not be able to make it back to the house either way, when something else intervened. After falling to the ground a few minutes later and realizing that I was severely hurt, face planted into the snow, with closed eyes, I genuinely thought I was gonna die. After fading out of consciousness, I awoke in front of Jesse's fireplace. Apparently, we showed up at the door with severe frostbite on our legs and some large scratches. Somehow we walked over an hour with these injuries. I think it must have been divine intervention. Even the emergency room doctor said that we shouldn't have made it back. Every once in a while I see it again, and I refuse to go back to those sand pits where we felt the unnerving energy for the first time. This was the most interesting encounter, but one of many. It was around 4:30 a.m. when I saw something that looked like a silhouette of a coyote, just its head, but something was really wrong about it. Its head was big enough to stretch to my other window pane. My window is about a foot, maybe a foot and a half. Now the thing that really scared the shit out of me is that my window is 4 or 5 feet off the ground, and coyotes are small. The silhouette of the head was almost at the top of my window. My goddamn window was open and unlocked. It still had the screen in its way, but all I had to do was tear it off. I don't know if it knew I was awake because I had my blanket and hood over my head. I was staring at it and trying to be as still as I could. I was trying to calm myself down, so I told myself that it was tree branches, making it look like a head of a wild coyote, and my mind was probably playing tricks on me. Because I was tired, I eventually fell asleep. When I woke up, the window was still open, but there was mud or something on my window, like something was trying to scratch on my window. My parents have told me that my brother used to have nightmares, and they think that maybe it was a spirit with bad intentions in our neighborhood that was bothering him. I put a line of salt and said some protecting words, while my mother helped me. I locked and closed the curtains, and I think I kept it that way. After reading more about skinwalkers, I think it's time to start locking every door and window in the house. Every other time that I've stayed up as late as 4 a.m., I've never seen it. I don't think it was trying to hurt me this time, because it just looked like it was trying to watch me. After hearing that it will come into your house, I want to know if anyone can help me keep it permanently out and away. Me and my 15-year-old daughter were driving over to one of her friend's house a little after 8 on a Monday night. Something passed in front of her car. It looked real. My daughter said it was gray. I say it was black but very muscular. It was the size of a large pit bull with broad shoulders. The arm sockets looked human, but the rest didn't. It had a round head, and it used its front paws to run. It would push off the ground with them, and they would go towards its side. The back legs would come up, and it would kind of tuck underneath it. I know how weird it sounds. It was almost like a panther. It was daylight, and I thought it looked strange, but I didn't want to alarm my daughter, so I didn't say anything. It ran beside an abandoned house on a road that runs perpendicular to the road that my home is on. She said, "Mama, that wasn't a dog." I replied to her that I thought the same thing. I just didn't want to say it. It ran really fast and it looked solid. I have no idea what it could have been, but we were talking about skinned pedestrians quite a lot Sunday night. I heard that those are bad luck. Who knows? I know how crazy that sounds. Edit. In the comments, a lot of you say it's the dog man, and I think you might be right. Thank you. This happened approximately 30 miles west of Charlotte in North Carolina in a semi-rural area. I don't remember the snout or tail, but it definitely helps on my search. It definitely had fur. It was the weirdest thing, and I thought I was going crazy or something. My friend, who happens to be an environmentalist out in the Pine Barrens, saw a dogman in Manchester County, New Jersey. His name is John, and he and his friends were going camping out in the woods, and they were in the large pickup truck. He was looking towards the tree line to make sure no deers were going to come jump into view. The truck was going about 40 miles per hour, and he noticed something that was following them on the trail. He then told his friend to slow down a bit, because they saw something following them, and before they could slow down, the creature jumped in the middle of the path and then back into the woods. They all got a clear description of what it was. My friend said it was tall, about 7 to 9 feet tall, with the body of a bodybuilder, perked ears, and a snout like a German shepherd. He also said that the appendages this animal had were human-like, but with large claws on the end of its hands and feet, and a huge bushy tail. After this event, he looked over at his friends, and they all looked like they had seen a ghost, with the blood drawn out of their faces. He still tells the story to this day, and I believe every word of it. I've talked to his friends who were with him, and they say the same thing. I worked the night shift. 3 days ago, I came home, took a shower, and was sitting on the couch. I had a box fan in the downstairs window, blowing cold air in. I live by an old cemetery in a small village next to a national park. I first thought something was wrong when the cats in the house were panicked, walking back and forth by the wall that faces the cemetery. I watched them for a minute and heard what sounded like crying coming from the cemetery area and a soft "help me." I sat there listening and heard it again a minute later. I quickly took the fan out of the window and closed it and locked it and made sure everything else was locked. The past few days since then, I've been feeling like I'm being watched. When I got home yesterday, my ears were ringing the loudest I've ever heard it before, and then I heard the soft sob again. I waited in my vehicle for 5 minutes, then I finally walked to my door that's about 10 feet away. When I was opening the door, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I hurried up and closed the door behind me and locked it. Once I was inside, the ringing immediately went away, but the cats were moving in a panicked manner again. I didn't know until recently that you're not supposed to say skinwalkers out loud, as it draws their attention, as does whistling at night. This is in Northeast Ohio. Any thoughts? Okay, so I don't even know how to start this. My friend and I, who actually had some weird premonition dreams throughout his life, never knew what a skinwalker was until this morning, when he had a dream about me warning him about a so-called skinwalker. When he woke up, he searched the term and found out what it was. I've been experiencing a series of very odd and scary dreams, all related to my house and family, for the past 2 months. When my friend called me and told me about the skinwalker dream, I remember the first nightmare I had 2 weeks ago. My dog was entering my room through the balcony, and something seemed off about him. Then I had my 2 legs twisted by something. A series of weird dreams continue to this day. I also live in a countryside area where people raise a lot of animals. All sorts of weird animal sounds can be heard at night, so I can't remember hearing anything out of the ordinary. Has anyone else experienced anything similar, or could this be a bad omen? Also, if something or someone is warning me about skinwalkers, is there anything someone could do as some sort of protection?